Everyone, we're going to officially call our board meeting this morning to order. And I'm first going to establish a quorum with roll call. I'm going to start to my right.
Public member. Joseph Federico, industry member.
Jackie Crabtree, industry member.
Coco Lachine, public member.
Dr. Carrie Williams, industry member.
Lisa Tong, public member.
Steve Weeks, public member.
Okay, we've established a quorum, and now we will move on with our first item on the agenda, and that is public comment on items not on the agenda. So just to be clear, everyone, we do have our packets up front. If you could review the agenda, and if there are any items that are not currently being discussed in today's meeting, then this is your time, and you can approach the podium. Okay, seeing no public comment, we're going to move on to action item number 3 on our agenda, which is the discussion and possible action related to our sunset review.
Good morning. So we have in your packet under items 3, as you all know, we're getting ready for our sunset review. Our report will be due later this year. So we wanted to have this meeting to kind of talk about the new issues that we should propose during sunset. And so in your packets, we have provided some recommendations, which we can go over. I also wanted to show you that what we provided during our last sunset review. So towards the back of your agenda packets are reports that we submitted at the last review. So we are doing something kind of a little different than normally. We went through our statutes and made various recommendations to things that us as staff felt would be beneficial to the board. So would you like me to just go through each one?
Yes.
Okay. So when we are talking about amending section 7303B to clarify that the board members receive per diem and expenses. I thought that was important. Obviously, we have a general statute, but boards need to have it clarified in their statute, so that's what this would do. Section 7313B, we are asking to increase our definition of access to schools. As we all know, what's been happening with schools and the selling of hours. What we have been finding while we are out in these schools is not just the selling of hours. In fact, sometimes worse is the actual just lack of curriculum. And because we approve the curriculum, we just want to make it clear in the statute that we have the authority to access the schools to ensure that the curriculum that they were approved to teach is actually what's being taught. Okay? Section 7314.3 is to allow the pay per diem and expenses to our Health and Safety Advisory Committee. They are a statutorily created committee, and so far have been doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, and so we would like to at least cover their expenses and per diem. Next is 7317. This is to prevent unlicensed activity being offered from app-based organizations. Of course, considering what might happen later in this meeting with our personal service permit, this change would need to happen because it is specific to unlicensed activity in a salon. So this would be requiring or clarifying that you can't facilitate unlicensed activity. Section 7320 is to strengthen our prohibition of practicing medicine. We have a recommendation here. Just so the board knows, this will come back to you again in August and then again in October. So think of these as our grand idea. So like, for instance, with practice of medicine, we might want to expand that or clarify it to make sure we're not crossing over into anything with the medical board. So we haven't talked to the medical board about this yet, but we would like to. So it could change a little bit, but the intent is that we want to make it clear that our salons shouldn't be practicing medicine or shouldn't be offering practices of medicine. Section 7334C and D require the board to approve a course of pre-apprentice training. Right now, it's just pre-apprentice training has to be just done in an approved facility. So this change would make it one of the things we're finding in the apprentice program is that they're going to take the pre-apprentice training, and then for whatever reason, they might change and go to a different program sponsor. That sponsor might require them to take the pre-apprentice training again. And basically, it could end up costing these individuals money, and then they might never even get licensed. So we think they should have to take that pre-apprentice training once they become licensed, but before they work on a client. Because the pre-apprentice training is all about the health and safety of for the board's regulations. And then the board currently doesn't approve that course. So we do think that the board should be approving that course. We have no idea what's really being taught. And then we also have listed that the board may also provide the pre-apprentice training. We had talked about this some time ago and talked about providing it. It could be an online course that could be developed as part of kind of in the method of how we're doing our health and safety curriculum. And moving on, we have 7342. This is going to be clarifying because we do have a personal service permit. We're talking about regulations on how to implement that a little bit later, but it does exist in statute. So this clarifies that section, indicating that the licensed establishment or outside of a licensed establishment with a valid personal service permit. Section 7348 is a clarification on the licensee in charge, that the licensee in charge is a person licensed pursuant to this chapter, means an individual who holds one of our license types as well as the establishment owner. Yes.
Are you asking us to take some action now on these recommended statutory changes?
Yes.
Because some of these could change dramatically as we get deeper into our agenda.
True.
Sorry. Yes, I was saying that.
We don't think so, though, Ron. We kind of crafted these to where we don't think they'll change, but by all means, what we wanted to do today for Sunset was to get the board's approval on what items they want us to include in the new issues, and this is our suggestion. So the board can say, we like all of these suggestions, except you need to clarify with whatever we talk about later in the meeting, or look at it again even at the next board meeting. But we wanted to have something today that the board gives us direction on what to bring to you in August that will actually be in the Sunset report.
Well, on 7342, it looks like what you're suggesting there, I'm confused by the verbiage on that. It doesn't sound like it's in compliance with your draft. The third sentence up from the bottom where it says, that occupation in a licensed establishment or outside of a licensed establishment with a valid personal services permit. Are you saying outside the scope of a licensed establishment? Or are you saying under a licensed establishment but working outside of that facility?
It's saying that, so it's talking about the license, so like a cosmetology license, shall entitle the holder to engage in the practice of the occupation licensed in a licensed establishment.
Right.
Or they can engage in those practices outside of a licensed establishment if they hold a valid personal service permit.
Okay, but the draft we're looking on, the personal services permit, is putting them inside the scope of an establishment license.
Correct. So that, I see what you're saying, that if the board maintains today that they want the personal service permit tied to an establishment, this would not be in our sunset review.
Okay.
Go ahead then.
Okay, so the way this is the actual work can either be done in the establishment or outside of the establishment. PSP makes it available for the establishment to be outside. It has nothing to do with tying it to the establishment.
You're right, because they could be tied to the establishment and could still be working outside. Thank you, Tammy.
It's broad enough to cover.
Oh,
Right, whichever direction we go.
does that make sense?
It does.
Sorry,
It
that
does. No,
helped me too.
it's fine.
So then the next section is kind of the same thing about the personal service permit, and it's talking about section 7349, which is unlicensed activity. And it currently says permit to work in or about an establishment. So that would be removed if when the personal service permit is enacted. Section 7363 is what we would like to see. This would be brand new. And it's something that we've found in our inspections of schools that we think would definitely strengthen our authority over schools. And it's a clarification that minimum equipment is talking about textbook of use. It's what a school would apply for when they apply to become licensed or approved and inspected, that they shall have minimum equipment, textbooks for use. We're going into schools where we find no textbooks. It's unfortunately more common than we ever thought it would be. And the course of instruction, which would include curriculum, lesson plans, method of instruction, and tracking of hours, which just doesn't exist in a lot of these schools. And then we should inspect these schools to determine compliance. So that's just to clarify that we're going out there and looking at those things.
Christy,
Yes.
how does this overlap with the work of BPPE?
It does, in a sense, that the BPPE does approve the educational curriculum. However, they approve the educational program, but we approve the curriculum. So while they are looking at it, they're also looking at the thought that the board is responsible for approving the curriculum. So there is a little bit of an overlap, and the overlap, it doesn't really increase it or decrease it than what we have of an overlap right now. I just think it does give us more authority to make sure when we are out in these schools, and we're going out with the Bureau, and as you know, we did a press release, so we've been successful in working with the Bureau over a few schools. But we see so much that we think we could do as well, and we've approved these curriculums. And so we feel like it's our responsibility to these students to make sure that what we've approved is actually being taught. So yes, there's still the overlap, but I think it's well worth our time. We're doing it anyways. I just wanted to clarify it in statute.
So would the idea be then, if you clarified this in statute, that you could basically take this on independently, or would you still be conducting those investigations in coordination with BPPE?
I think we would definitely still conduct I think we could do more on our own if
Okay.
needed, but I wouldn't want to back away from the inspections that we've had with the Bureau recently, because they really look at a lot more stuff than what we do. And the work that we've done together has been a learning experience for both, and so it's really helpful to actually have both of our entities there.
Okay.
Because we can answer their questions and they can answer our questions. So it's been pretty successful working with them these last few months.
Very good. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the first line, letter A, when it says inspect a school prior to approval by the BPPE, not us, right?
No, by us.
By us. So is our approval contingent to BPPE approving a school?
Yes.
Thank you.
So then the next section on page 4 is to amend section 7362, and that is our grounds for discipline, and we just wanted to strengthen our grounds for discipline for the items that we have found in schools, and this would allow us a stronger case to take to the Attorney General's office, and we're requesting that we add providing fraudulent proof of training documents to individuals who have not completed the required course or not providing to students the full course of instructions in the specified field. So that would be something it's clarifying that it is grounds for actual disciplinary action against some of these schools that are doing that. Any questions? So before I go on, that's kind of our first section of recommendations, which is our various maybe amendments. So I'm not sure if the board would want to take a motion on that to keep all of these in sunset. I think the next section is going to maybe raise more questions, so I thought maybe we could sort of break it up.
Or could we move to the next section, since they may have material effect on
Come back.
some of these, and come back to
Not a
these?
problem. I might need Okay, so the next section is scope of practice recommendations. And as everyone knows, we have recently been questioned about some of our scope of practices and looking at the potential to come up with ways, and we think this is important as we head into sunset, coming up with ways to increase entry into the professions. And aside from that, we've also had several discussions over the last couple of years of different scope of practice changes or recommendations that we really feel could be cleaned up in our statutes. So going through this, the first section we're recommending changing is the barbering scope of practice, and it's just to clarify that shaving is the face, neck, or scalp by the use of razors, shears, or clippers. We all know that, but it's never been put in statute. So this just strengthens the barber scope of practice by making it known that that's what the shaving is for, that the barbers do. So that's the simple one. Next on our practice of cosmetology, you can see the recommendations we're making, and one of the things we are doing is making it uniform with cosmetology, and then of course within cosmetology, you have nail care and skin care, and we're making those two sections, all those sections match. They don't match currently. So we cleaned it up to make it match. We also took out some items that we didn't feel were necessary anymore, like machineless permanent waving. And then so if you look at number 2, that's the nail care portion on page 5. So it's just clarifying what we had currently in the nail care scope of practice. And then we've really updated the aesthetics scope of practice, and that is over the last several years of discussions we've had with estheticians at the board, with some bills that were proposed in the past, making it clear that estheticians can work on the entire body. Making it clear that we clarified some aesthetic devices that we think would help with the estheticians. Aesthetic devices shall be operated in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Do you want to?
Yeah, so one thing that I know you guys are going to take a look at, you'll probably notice that we put tinting the eyelash eyebrows of any person. We already have that in our curriculum, that it's available for them to teach it. We want to keep it in statute because we don't want to lose that service. But our regulations clarify that it has to be something the FDA is on board with us using. So just.
The change.
I meant no change in.
And that,
inspection.
right. But we are adding that estheticians, well, hopefully there's going to be a product available soon. And in the past, estheticians haven't been able to do that because it's been considered hair color. And so it's cosmetology. But the estheticians are dealing with the face, they're dealing with the eyes. So from staff's perspective, we definitely think that the estheticians, if that product becomes available, are well-trained to be able to take on that service.
It also opens up full body for estheticians. So the issue of back facials is not an issue anymore if we have the scope that we are presenting to you.
Question. Pardon my ignorance, but number 9, has that always been there? The chemical.
No, it
Okay.
was part of the cosmetology and barbering scope of practice to perm the hair. But again, the estheticians have so much training, and we don't see, consumer harm from this. So we've added it to the esthetician scope.
With the tinting of the eyelashes or eyebrows, should we be adding language to clarify that it must be FDA approved within that line?
We already,
The regulation? We have it in regulation already, the product. So I wouldn't necessarily put it in statute since we have it existing in regulation, and then, and the regulation states that it can't be approved or.
a product can't be used that is in a disapproved manner by the FDA.
So it's under our health and safety regulations.
Right. I just get a sense that if somebody wasn't really diligent, they would read this part and not read the other part and feel like they can do it. So I just wouldn't want people to be confused.
We also have an industry bulletin out on that too that clarifies FDA's stand on that too. I don't know if that helps you with that, but.
I just feel like from DRC over and over again, all we hear is that these people do not know that it must be FDA approved. So,
We can add that.
okay.
Any other questions on that part?
I have a question on, under the practice of cosmetology, you list number 7, applying makeup or eyelashes to any person. That sounds very broad to me. I mean, are we saying that no department store can apply makeup to any individual?
No, there's a separate statute that exempts people from demonstration. So anybody working in, say, a Mac counter in Macy's,
Right.
whose their intent is to try to sell you their makeup, so they're already exempt from our law.
Good.
I do appreciate how going through this, you've actually like decided to like copy the language from one
Yes.
license to another, and I felt like, how long have we been in existence without this being like that?
Yes.
So I do appreciate the consistency. So good job on that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry,
Mo-
one quick point. Kind of pivoting off Joe, if we add what Lisa's asking to add, that's only going into the, is that only going into the esthetician license, and therefore we would have to go and put it back? If we want everything to be the same.
We'll make it the same.
We'd have to put it in all three multiple locations,
It would go in 2 locations.
2 locations,
Or
and
would it be
then,
Barber? Yeah, 2 locations.
just curious, if we do that, and then the FDA finally approves things, are we gonna go back to 5 years from now and say, well, let's strike this
Nope.
now because it's no longer
No,
important,
because it'll
as opposed
say,
to right now, all we have to do is change the regulation kind of a thing?
but it'll say it can't be used in a manner that is disapproved by the FDA. So it would always stand
Okay.
unless the FDA goes away. Okay, moving on now to the exciting part, if it wasn't exciting enough already. In addressing some of the concerns about licensing in the industry, and one of the big discussions has been cosmetology requiring 1,600 hours and the thought that someone has to go to school for so long to become a cosmetologist. We are recommending, and this board has talked about it several times, the establishment of a hairstylist license. We have that on page 7 in your packets, which talks about a hairstylist license, and we've described the scope of practice, which is arranging, dressing, curling, waving, and et cetera, on just hairstyling portion from cosmetology.
Great.
We have also, in addition to that, keeping in mind this is sunset, so it's when we put everything out and then we can whittle it down. But we also thought several years ago in a sunset report, we were asked to look at different licensing categories, and the board at that time said the categories are fine the way they are. Well, that was 5 years ago, so times have changed. So in that, with talking about the hairstylist license, we have also recommended the idea of a hair removal, a waxing certificate or license, and as well as makeup, because those are 2 issues that have come up to the board in the past. So that's a recommendation for the board to discuss if they wanted to pursue that.
So 2 questions or a couple questions and a comment about this. A, when on the hairdressing license, the 1,300 hour limit that you guys set, how was that created? Was that just kind of like going back and like looking at the standard and like, okay, well, if they want a hairdresser license, we'll remove this, and remove this? I just wonder like where the 1,300 hours came up from.
That was the one we were on, and we took out all the stuff
Oh, okay.
from that has listed all the hours of
Okay.
things that were applied to other parts of the nail and skincare.
Okay.
And keeping in consistently the health and safety.
That's fine.
But I mean, what do you think?
Well, I was just I just felt
I
I just
mean,
thought
you-
after
you're
we
in the
extracted, I just thought the 1,300 hours seemed high after
Yeah,
I thought it would have been lower than that.
I was gonna ask, being a
was
part of that committee, I was gonna
1,100.
say, I thought it was 1,100.
It was on the
Yeah.
training, but you guys also said that 200 health and safety hours needed to be included, so that's why it's 13.
Okay.
So okay, okay. So I was just wondering where that number came about, and then secondly, on the makeup licensure. So if someone were to get a makeup license under this thing, that would only the exclusion still exists as Steve Weeks was mentioning earlier for like the MAC cosmetic counters, right? So the makeup license would only exist that if someone were to walk into a salon and they want makeup done, you can hire a makeup artist for that salon, and that would be their job. So they could only be basically working in an establishment applying makeup. That's the only time that makeup or under a PSP, I guess you would say. So that's basically like the two different examples of how that one would apply. Just making sure. Okay.
Again, just a recommendation from staff, so it's completely up to the board to discuss if they wanted to pursue that or not.
Right now, hair removal, waxing, and makeup is being done in the salon.
Yes.
You just want to specify a specific license
Right.
for, and would that exclude a cosmetologist from doing either one of those?
No.
It's just simplifying it, so there's just like, you can just get a license for makeup.
It gives an option.
Just get a license for waxing.
There is a national test for waxing, not for makeup, I don't believe. There's not one for makeup. There might be. We do know for sure that there is a national test for wax technicians because other states do license them.
A portion of our students do. A portion of people are really like. It seems like people today interested in aesthetics are also interested in makeup. So it's kind of like a little bit of give and take. But I'm I'm a believer that if we have the whole hog being cosmetology, right, where it allows you to do everything, it's like, why not parse out those individual things? I mean, there gets to be a level of parsing where it becomes too narrow.
Right.
But I mean, if I could see the makeup licensure being something that someone would do, like in addition to, I could see someone maybe doing maybe they just want to do makeup and waxing. And so they do kind of go for that rather than doing a full aesthetics license. But
So that means they need dual licenses to do certain things. Like, for example, if someone is hired to do a wedding, which might include hair and makeup, and they're not cosmetologists, so they're gonna need two specific licenses
They
in this
could.
case.
Right.
Otherwise, it'll be two.
Okay.
I think that's all I have.
So now that we've gone through all of the suggested items for us to discuss the recommended statutory changes for us to include in our sunset review, I know we've had a little bit of conversation. Are there any other questions or comments about what's been proposed to us by our board staff?
I just have a question of, if we create these different licenses, are we opening ourselves up to the possibility of a lot more people practicing outside their new scope? I.e., I only have, a haircutting license, but then I'm gonna do something else because everybody else around me is doing something else, and I want the extra money, and I didn't want to pay for the schooling, and
Well, I think just with the way that the industry is shifting and knowing already, like especially with the waxing license, and we think about the issue that we've had with our manicurists who also are performing waxing and at first wanting to include that within their scope of practice, that this allows them an option to just take a couple of additional hours and have dual licensure, as Coco said, where the hope is it will reduce the amount of consumer harm and unlicensed activity we see in that particular area. And knowing, being on the board when some of these items came before us during sunset, as Christy said, I agree, the industry is shifting and changing, and now we're in a time where we do see a lot of individuals who are pursuing jobs in our industry but aren't getting the correct licensure with social media and things like that. It's a lot of people our industry is exciting, and I think that this would just give them more options. And yeah, that's my comment so far, knowing that we have other things we're going to be discussing later.
I agree also that it's going to be it could be a bit of a nightmare for inspections on this. Could we do something on the, maybe on the identification of the license itself to show more broadly on the license what they are specifically allowed to do by our board? Could we know that the license has to be at each station and in view, maybe we can do something more visually to tell the consumer what this person can do.
Yeah, I agree with Steve on this because, for a consumer, they might assume if a person is licensed, they're licensed to do everything. So I think the educational process outreach later would be important.
Okay, so I believe we need a motion, correct?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
So, please.
Can I just say one thing, though? Are we going to approve these even though we haven't finished the PSP that we're going to do further?
So you're approving of this.
Mm-hmm.
If you choose to do that, is approving it to go into the sunset review, and you're gonna get 2 more shots at it.
Okay.
So it's really kind of I mean, at the next meeting, you could say, we changed our minds, we're voting to take this part out, but it'll give us what we need to prepare the
Get
sunset.
started.
So I want to make one motion right now. I'm going to separate this into 2 separate motions. So the first motion I'm going to make is for to proceed with the recommended statutory changes. Basically, everything up until we start talking about the scope of practice recommendations, and I'm going to put that through as a second motion. So I would like to make that motion.
A second.
All right.
Clarification, we're just approving things that are underlined with the exception of that statute that is new.
Correct.
7363,
Correct.
not any other wording that is not underlined.
Correct.
Okay, because there was a typo that wanted to make sure.
Well, aren't we also including what Lisa
If you
wanted to
have a
add about the
recommendation, though,
FDA approval? So we are adding that without actual language.
But I think the approval is to give staff
right.
basically the authority
Yeah,
to move
just, but it
forward.
is not written down right now. That's what I was just trying to clarify.
Do I need to clarify my motion then?
Can you also, is it possible to add also that we would modify the license, the physical license, to reflect could that be as part of this?
I think
I think
can come
that'd be
later.
in the second motion that I would make where we're talking about scope of practice. So do I need to modify the motion to
No,
include?
because we're talking about the FDA requirement,
Yeah.
that comes into scope of practice.
Okay. That's-
So
okay.
your current
Alright.
motion is for pages 1 through 4.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, good. Just making sure. So we have,
A second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and now we'll open up for public comment.
This is awfully low. Does that carry or should I hold it? Okay. Good morning. Fred Jones on behalf of the Professional Beauty Federation of California. Couple of comments on the first motion. On page 3, dealing with inspecting schools, which we very much appreciate, and by the way, it hasn't been mentioned, so I will publicly acknowledge and thank this board for working with the BPPE and essentially shutting down 3 bad schools that were selling hours. We hope it's the first of a few more to come, but we're grateful for those long-term efforts that your staff have been making to make sure schools are not defrauding students and undermining the integrity of our license. The only concern I have in this first motion is on section 7363B. I think it's superfluous because section C reiterates the authority to inspect. But I also just balked at the term levels at the end of that sentence, B. So it reads, the board or its duly authorized representative shall inspect schools to reasonably determine compliance levels. I don't know, it's pretty vague, pretty ambiguous. I just think striking the entire sentence would be appropriate. So I don't know what levels you're referring to. But I will say, since before you make the second motion, if I could just briefly touch upon scope of practice. going through my list. In speaking with schools, and I did not speak with the Federicos, when you create a new license, it creates new complications.
Excuse me one second, Mr. Jones. If you
Yes.
could wait till we get a motion on that particular part of our discussion regarding the scope of practice for your comment.
Okay.
Allow us to get a motion on the floor.
I would just caution you about creating a bunch of new licenses, which I will come back and address in a
Okay.
moment. But I think that was all I had on page 1 through 4. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Okay.
So to clarify, you're taking comments on just the first
On the
portion?
first motion, yes.
Correct. Okay, so Jamie Schrabeck, Precision Nails. I'm concerned that if we use the phrase offered by on page 2, do we refer to, this is under the practice of medicine, are you using the words offered by as advertised by? In other words, if someone were advertising that they did those services, would that be considered offering them?
What you're saying here, the practice of medicine shall not be
Performed by or
performed
advertised by?
by or offered by a licensee.
I'm asking if someone were to advertise that, just to attract people to their business, whether they do it or not. I think that's something that should be, yeah.
Legal.
In terms of the language of offered by, that's something it would be on a case-by-case basis. We'd have to look at the information and whether or not we do have evidence that would support some sort of advertising would be considered quote-unquote offered
Okay.
by. So that's something that would have to be thrown to the realm of the judicial system as well as looking at the case-by-case. So it could be, it could not, so it just depends.
I think if you're going to go ahead and make the change that by putting the word advertising in there, that's something that people could really relate to. As a licensee, they know what they advertise, whether it's on the web or Facebook or in their materials. And then I love what you've done with the section 7362, but I think that D, saying that you're providing fraudulent proof of training there, the damage has already been done at that point. I think you need something specifically in there that says something that there's proof of, you can clarify it, but that gets to the selling of hours as it's happening, not at the end of a 10-month course, all of a sudden there's this faulty proof of training requirement.
Which line are you talking about?
Oh, I'm sorry, on page 4, section 7362D,
Okay.
you're talking about
Oh,
providing
proof of
fraudulent proof
training.
of training documents. By that time, the crime has already been committed.
So that's because that's what the section is for.
Okay,
The section is addressing it after the fact for us to go forward with formal disciplinary action. If we've found it currently, that happens under our access to inspections. We've already found it, but once we go forward, we have to have a ground for formal discipline.
okay. So falsely recording hours, like clocking people in and out when they're not even there in the building, that's not grounds for discipline right now.
Not clarified, that's why we want it very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Wendy Cochran, California Aesthetic Alliance. Outstanding. I couldn't be more thrilled for all of the patience that you have had for me coming and yelling at you every quarter and having you include us as viable parts and licensees that are not subordinate to the other licensed disciplines. One of the things I did want to kind of point out that I was concerned about is you have licensed establishment as verbiage so for instance in page 3, outside of a licensed establishment. Are you considering licensed establishments that have a lot of infractions against them? Is that something that maybe you need to possibly amend the language to say licensed establishment in good standing, rather than just somebody being a licensed establishment and maybe they have a bunch of infractions or a lot of DRC meetings coming up to consider? Because if you've got, there was an incident with a very bad nail salon that came up and was waxing without a license. Consumers don't know, and I think that their status as an establishment is really important to consider in the language. So that's something that I'm asking that you consider, is that the wording is actually including in good standing, so that you have an option to maybe discipline or review what's going on with them if they are not.
So I think that's going to determine what happens on the next agenda item.
Okay.
And I think it might be better suited to come up in that discussion.
Okay, and you are only going to page 3, 4?
4.
Okay, 4, excellent.
Come to where it says scope of practice recommendation.
Great.
Just a comment, again, it's going to all come back to you in next month. But I personally would agree that I wrote the language on page 3 for 7363B, that talking about the compliance levels for schools. I'm not sure where I came up with that, so I think it's fine if we strike that. We think that we have it covered in another section where we have access.
Keep striking that.
You're
Mhm.
striking the
And
entire
then-
line or just the word levels?
That B, all of B is unnecessary. And then also we will look at 7320 to clarify the advertising aspect of it, as well as we're going to still work with the medical board to make sure that we're clear on what we're talking about there.
Do we have any additional public comment on our first motion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote. I'll start to my.
Clarification, don't
Yes.
we need to do an amendment if we are striking B to the motion?
the motion.
Just as,
A friendly amendment.
just as amended, to approve as amended,
Okay.
if you want to amend the motion.
That would-
Your motion, Joe.
What he said.
Okay, so we are now calling for a vote on our amended motion. I'll start to my left.
Steve Weeks, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Coca Lachine, yes.
Jackie Crabtree, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Andrew Drapkin, yes.
Okay, the motion passes, and so now we need a motion for our scope of practice recommendations. And I know, Joe, you said you had a 2-part motion.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a motion to accept the scope of practice recommendations as seen, as demonstrated.
A second.
Okay, so we currently have a motion on the floor, and we will open up for public comment.
Fred Jones, Professional Beauty Federation, California. Thank you. Okay, as I was saying earlier, I'll reiterate a little bit more detail. It does complicate things when you create new license categories. Most of our schools receive Title IV federal loan dollars, which means they have to be accredited by a U.S. Department of Education accrediting agency. And most of them are accredited through NACUS. NACUS requires every new license category, every program, even if it doesn't lead to a license, to be thoroughly vetted and approved by them. So that's just one example of a complication. The more important complication is what Andrew brought up. If you have these sub-license categories working in a hairstyling license establishment, will they pick up shears? Will they pick up chemicals and start doing things that actually earn a real career earning living? So we get that there are policymakers, not just in California, it's nationwide, that are concerned about barriers to entry. SB 999 was a real shot across the bow, both to our industry but also to your state board. And the fact that we have sunset review coming up next year means that even though we were, and I say we, the industry and even the state board unitedly opposed that bill, it ain't the end of that battle. So I understand and share the concerns about barriers to entry. Now, I will say that your board licenses over 500,000 Californians. If you do the math, 38 million Californians, it's 1.5% of every man, woman, and child is licensed by your board. And since children can't be licensed by your board, it's even a higher percentage. There's over 55,000 licensed salons. What barrier is there? So we do need to push back, both from the state board and industry, to this notion that there are unreasonable barriers to entry that are preventing people from making bona fide living in this industry. Where they do have an issue is, before those 500,000 individuals got licensed, they weren't able to make a living in this industry. I get that. That's why our organization supports dramatically increasing externships or create a work permit. Limit it to people that are actually pursuing a license. Because the most important issue that we cannot lose sight of, and certainly you shouldn't in protecting consumers, is unlicensed activity. So, most nail salons, 90%, 80%, it's a high percentage, offer waxing services right now, today, in neon lights. That's illegal unless there's a cosmetologist or esthetician working in that nail salon. Any guesses what percentage have an esthetician or a cosmetologist working in a nail salon? Negligible to zero, somewhere in that range, right? So they're already operating beyond their licensed scope of practice. Would creating a waxing license help them? It possibly could, if they were willing to actually now come above the radar and be legitimate. And could someone, and here's the most important concern I think we should make from an industry vantage point, but also in response to this concern about barriers. Can someone make an honorable living just doing waxing? I think the answer could be yes. Could someone make an honorable living just doing makeup? And I'm not talking about Hollywood. Outside of Hollywood, outside of the Paramount and MGM studios, etc. I have a concern that someone can make a bona fide living with a makeup license only. And so, are you creating a system, going back to Andrew's concern, where they could have a license that can protect them at an inspection moment, but when the inspectors aren't present, are they working well beyond their scope of practice to actually earn a living? My industries association has come down on the side of supporting a hairstylist license to answer the concern about barriers to entry. Beyond that, I don't know. We're concerned about waxing, and we're absolutely opposed to creating a makeup artist license. Our position, and by the way, NIC does offer a waxing exam. I don't think they offer a makeup artist exam. So if you created a new makeup artist license, now you're going to be back in the business of creating your own licensing exams. Do you want to go there? Is that something policymakers want, since they approve of the national exam, given its state-to-state reciprocity implications and so forth? We, again, think if you want to address barriers to making a living in the industry, let's look at helping students, after they receive enough health and safety and theoretical content to be safe, let them go to work in a salon, and if a salon chooses, let the salon pay them, so long as they continue to be bona fide enrollees working toward a license. We don't want to create a new form of unlicensed activity. We saw that with apprenticeships, where they would just repeat their apprenticeship license. After 2 years, they'd expire and they'd ask for a new apprenticeship license. You guys corrected that. Let's not create that same concern. We think a PSP responds to policymakers' concerns. So we will be discussing that in greater detail in the agenda. I'm just going through where I think we can respond to policymakers. The hairstylist license, I think, is the appropriate bone to throw. And given the fact that your own surveys of cosmetologists say that 92% only do hair, why not give them another alternative that's shorter schooling to just do what they're going to do anyway, which is only hair? And then finally, I want to make this point because it's relevant to this entire overarching issue. One of the talking points you'll hear from certain folks about barriers to entry, and I'm not looking at anyone in particular, David, is that you guys, in addition to all the schooling requirements that you require. You also require students or candidates for licensure to take 2 licensing exams. That is an understandable conclusion to reach from an outsider's perspective. Because when this board went to computer-based written exams, in which you could pass or take an exam and then fail and then immediately re-enroll and take it again if you failed it, because computer technology, your board kind of separated the written portion from the practical portion. And the public's perception is, oh, and by the way, if you pass one section and you fail another, we supported you in this effort. We said, hey, don't make you take both portions again. Just take the portion you failed. But again, that has led to the perception there are 2 separate licensing exams. The current code, the BMP code governing your board, says there is only 1 licensing exam, and for purposes of grading, the practical score shall prevail. To me, that means aggregate scoring. You need to take both portions of the exam, aggregate, score them, and then if they reach an aggregate score that meets the threshold, they're given a license. So I believe to remove one of the talking points against barriers to entry, you need to reinstate some form of aggregate scoring. So externships or work permit, PSP, hairstylist license, and return aggregate scoring. I think those are a powerful argument you can make during next year's sunset review that you've addressed barriers to entry concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. Madam President and members, good morning. My name is David Wolf. I'm the legislative advisor at a group called the R Street Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan association focused on individual liberty and free market issues on topics including occupational licensing, which is why I'm here today. I'm going to be back before you in a few minutes speaking on SB 999, which the R Street Institute was the sponsor of, but I would like to make just a couple of comments on this agenda item quickly, if I could. First of all, can you make an honorable living doing hairstyling? Of course you can. There are groups out there right now, including Glam Squad, who go around to people's homes and do hairstyling, which does not include dyeing or haircutting, and they're able to make a living and make money doing this. So absolutely, yes, you can make an honorable living doing hairstyling applications. As it pertains to the new license of 1,300 hours, we would argue that you've gone from 1,600 to 1,300. We would argue that that number is still excessively high. And just as an example, we'd refer to other states. Over the last 6 years, there have been 6 states that have exempted just specifically just shampooing from the Barbering and Cosmetology Code section. And the average of those states' new shampooing licenses is 40 clock hours and 1 exam. And again, that's just one application, and obviously I understand that the hairstyling application license that you proposed here is a lot broader than that. But 40 clock hours, 1 exam for one piece of that. 1,300 cumulatively just seems really high. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment at this time?
Jamie Strawbeck, Precision Nails. So we can avoid having very bad nail salons, as Wendy refers to. I want to note that in the description of the nail care scope of practice, here you have the license category that one could argue generates the most complaints, and we have the shortest description of scope of practice. If we were going to get into the weeds like we have with hairstyling, we'd also add terms like exfoliating, moisturizing, decorating, shaping, dipping, extending, enhancing, applying artificial nails to. We'd add a lot more stuff. So right here in this description, there's nothing about extensions, acrylics, gels at all. And I would also add that the terms from the elbow to the fingertips and knee to the toes should come right after the term massaging, because that's the area that you'd be massaging would be to the knee or to the elbow. And then putting on my PhD hat, with regard to the 200 hours of health and safety and how you guys got to 1,300 hours rather than 1,000 or an 1,100 hour course curriculum for the hairstylist license. The analogy I would make would be if you were going to culinary school, the first thing you might learn about is food safety. What temperature do you keep foods chilled at? What temperature is it appropriate to serve hot food at? But once you learn that information, that's how you practice every time you make a recipe. Same thing with doing our services. We learn about the safety, we learn about washing the tools, cleaning our surfaces, dealing with skin, whatever, washing our own hands, and then we just do it every single time we do a service. It's not a separate hour. It doesn't take 200 hours to teach people what to do. It takes about 2 hours, and that would be if you were explaining a little bit about the biology and the chemistry and that sort of thing. It's just getting them in the practice of doing it. So somehow we keep getting hung up on this 200-hour thing, when it's really you are practicing health and safety every single hour you're at school. Every single hour you're in the salon, you are practicing health and safety. So I would just ask that you think about this differently. If you were in an English class and you were having to write an essay, you're not getting points for grammar because the assumption is that you already know how to write. And now you're being judged on the content of your ideas, just like we're being judged on the quality of the work that we do, assuming that we're safe because we've been licensed, because we've supposedly practiced this all throughout school, and we do it every single day in the salon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Cochran, California Aesthetic Alliance. From an aesthetics standpoint, yes, you can make a fine living doing $65 eyebrows, waxing only. Okay. You can also make a fine living being a lash artist. So that's something that if you do consider making these carve-out licensures, you may want to consider that as something that, we're all individuals. We like doing what we do, and sometimes we're better at some things than we are other things. So if I like to sit there and glue eyelashes on a person in silence for 2 hours at a time, and that's probably all I really want to do, similar to how some of the hairdressers want to just do hair. So that is something that you should consider. In the language, you're using the words live tissue and non-living uppermost layers. There's also the existence of corneotherapy, which means from the inception of a skin cell until it hits the floor on its own, on its own way through our bodies. That says that tissue, that skin cell, has a signal and a job to do on its own as it's involved with the body. So when you say live tissue, it's all live tissue until it leaves us on its own recognizance. So that's something that you're going to see in advancement of skincare in the future that is kind of weird for me to see live tissue and non-living and not addressing the technical terms of stratum corneum, epidermis, and dermis. We all know that down here, section 4 on page 6, you do refer to as the epidermis. Some skincare preparations and processes do involve the dermis, unfortunately, or fortunately. So that's just kind of where the technology is going. And it also involves like manual manipulation of facial massages and things like that too. That involves the dermis as well. So I would hope that in your revision in the next 2 meetings that you kind of consider live tissue, non-living tissue, and using the term stratum corneum, and epidermis and dermis where you need them appropriately mentioned. I also have concerns about your equipment included in your scope of practice. You aren't mentioning microdermabrasion as a machine that is being able to be used, and that's very popular. Microcurrent isn't involved in that. Ultrasonic isn't involved in that. So right now you have it in the regulation to consider these things. When I've reported schools that have been teaching things that have been out of scope, like radio frequencies to the students, and we know that that is out of scope, when you have the language that includes are not limited to or may be considered invasive, the schools use that as justification as to why they were teaching these students radio frequency and things like that. So you may want to consider not having that in your direct call out. But you are missing some pretty important things like microdermabrasion, microcurrent, ultrasonic from this list of things here. So I just hope you will consider that in your next couple of rounds of language adoption. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Rich Hedges. I just wanted to speak on the waxing license. I really think there's two parts of this. I think the idea is good. And in my history, I know that inspectors visit nail salons and find hot wax pots. I think a couple of board members have already spoken to it. No one present with a license, and it's always the excuse is, well, I call a person in to do that, which is absolutely impossible for the inspector to validate other than to give a citation and then see if they appeal and bring any evidence. The question I have is two-part. Will we be able to control on something so narrow, the selling of hours? One. And number two, will we find schools willing to carve out, and I would ask Joe Federico to speak on this, find schools to carve out these small niches, because there has been some resistance on the part of schools even to give education remedially to people who have been cited when that's been required, because it's such a small niche of hours. So that would be my issues on waxing, even though I think it's a great idea to have a certificate or a license for waxing. It would really improve probably the quality of life for people in the nail industry. The other issue is on the makeup issue, and I have to agree with Fred on this. As someone who represented about 20% of the people in department stores who do makeup worldwide, I know they didn't earn their money from doing applications of the makeup. They earned a good living from the promotional money they got from the cosmetics companies. And unless that comes down to the salon level, my feeling is that they would never earn a living that would allow them to live outside of public assistance. Thank you.
To respond to Richard's comments, I do agree with him. I believe that if you do provide the niche for these smaller programs, that schools will kind of take it up. And then responding back to what Fred Jones was saying about NACIS and Title IV, like financial aid, for a program to have Title IV financial aid, it has to hit a minimum of hours. And with these smaller programs, where they're like 240 and I believe 270 hours, those would actually not even be hitting that minimum to be eligible for financial aid. But the flip side of that is what a lot of schools will do is they will teach these programs, and they have to be taught without the assistance of federal financial aid, that they will teach them as a cash course, and as part of the stipulations of federal financial aid, you have to maintain what they call a 90-10, which is the sources of your funds, no more than 90% of it can come from federal agencies. So schools will, Title IV schools will sometimes use these smaller programs that they're just strictly cash-based to help offset against their 90-10 and still provide a viable means for that kind of education.
Thank you, Joe. On the record, do we have any additional public comment?
Good morning, I'm Laura Embleton. I'm with Associated Skincare Professionals and Associated Hair Professionals. We just had a couple questions more in the weeds here on what's being allowed and what's not being allowed. And starting off with the barbering scope here, is it possible under this that Cosmos could still shape someone's beards, or is that only limited to barbers at this point? Because I know that happens in a lot of salons where they're just like shaping the beard and stuff like that. So by having it under 7316A1, does that limit Cosmos from doing that? And then moving to the skincare side of things, under on page 7, under skincare, which is D, and then you have 2, A, B, and C, wondering about inserting a D regarding dermaplating as an option for performing light or superficial exfoliation procedures, because a lot of people do dermaplating, and so that would kind of fit in there. And then under 3 there, the next line down, a lot of schools teach extraction with lancet, and it's part of the core curriculum and is allowed in most states. So can we put something in there saying like extraction with an extraction tool, including but not limited to non-needle extraction tools and disposable lancets? And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Miley Pacheco, founder of Be Glammed. I just wanted to say something that might want to consider in looking at the scope of the cosmetology regulations for makeup artists specifically. I currently sit as an advisor for several makeup schools in the state of California, and they teach makeup in length, which is great. What I have seen and have not seen in cosmetology schools is the length of the makeup curriculum that is built out. I spend a lot of time with pre and post graduates, as well as pre and post state board licensed cosmetologists. What I'm hearing a lot is that they are disappointed. They're under the impression that they go to a cosmetology school to learn how to do makeup, and the curriculum's just not built out as thoroughly as they would like to see it. And the products themselves are actually severely outdated. They're not the latest technology in products and makeup that they're seeing, as well as with false lashes and the education behind lashes. And actually what I'm seeing mostly is that the makeup artists don't have the skill set to apply false lashes, and because the product that they're using in the schools is outdated, they're also not using the latest technology and product that has key ingredients that can now help to treat skin, as well as really improve the wearability and durability of the makeup they're applying. So I would just say consider that professional development with makeup artists is something that I hold near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I'm constantly hearing with students is that the makeup is not thoroughly built out in the programming, and they're ending up dropping out. So there's a high dropout rate of cosmetology students that go to school wanting to learn makeup, and they don't learn the makeup skill set that they want to. So just wanted to leave you with that.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we do currently have a motion on the floor regarding our scope of practice recommendations. Are there any additional questions or comments from the board regarding the motion?
On a vote on this, I assume there may be some changes in verbiage that could come back next week or next month on this that you've been taking.
You said next week? Okay. No. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and call for a vote, seeing we have no additional questions or comment. I'll start to my right.
Can we just get clarity? What is, the motion is basically just to move on, right?
The motion was to accept this whole cloth and basically push it down the line for the next motion.
Andrew Rapkin, aye.
Joseph Federico, aye.
Jackie Crabtree, aye.
Coalition, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Steve Weeks, yes.
Okay, so the motion passes so that our staff can continue to do great work. And we will move on to the next item under this agenda item, and I'll defer to Ms. Christy Underwood. About the booth rental? No?
Oh, no, that was just from last year.
Oh, got it.
Samples from last year that I wanted.
Oh, got it, okay. So now we will move on to our next item on the agenda, which is a discussion regarding possible action for the regulatory language regarding our personal service permit. So I will defer to Ms. Christy Underwood on this one.
Carrie? Carrie?
Yes.
I have a feeling this is going to take a while. Is there any way we can take like a 10-minute break and then come back?
Yes. Yes, we can. So we'll go ahead and break for 5 minutes, and we'll come back.
Sounds good.
Advise everyone that we do have a revised draft of the regulatory language for our personal service permit on the back table if you haven't already gotten a copy, so that you can take a look at some of the regulatory language that we are considering today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our executive officer, Ms. Christy Underwood.
In your packets are the proposed regulations that have been built from the prior meetings that we've had, the industry meetings that we've had, and as well as our licensing committee meeting. We have taken everything from those meetings and put together in your packet that was mailed to you. We have received several comments, as our board is aware, of recommendations. So that's what's been placed now on the back table and provided to all the members is a recommendation that we have received that would basically, one of the most important things is removing the PSP being tied to a brick and mortar salon, as well as some background check information, which we as staff actually really like how it's been worded in the proposed. We are also going to be talking about 2138 pretty soon, a bill that is going to require, if passed, some DOJ clearance. So if that happens, then those regulations wouldn't be needed to do fingerprint clearances because we would have it for everyone anyway. However, the recommendations, so you have two recommendations in front of you right now. Everything that has been talked about is the one that is in your packet. And then I have worked with representatives from Glam Squad who have provided some revisions. We've received a lot of input over the last few days from lots of individuals and lots of legislators who are encouraging our board to look at this and kind of expand business in California by not tying this to the brick and mortar salons. So with that being said, that's for discussion to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to open it up for discussion.
So I'd like to say to everybody here on the board a few things. I understand that they want us to not tie it to a brick and mortar. My concern is what would happen, a few things. Are we creating, again, more underground income and more people not paying taxes to the state by opening up that it would be almost, again, more of an independent contracting going on, and we already know we have a huge problem with underground income as it is in our state, especially in our industry. I also am concerned that it can cause more attrition in our industry and default on student loans when these people are getting out of school and going straight to work for an app like Glam Squad when they're not set up for success. Just straight out of school going to work at an app and go do hair. I just worry about that. Also with the new ABC law that came down from the Supreme Court in California, that independent contractors are not supposed to be working in our industry. I mean, so that's something that I'm, because they're not employees with like Glam Squad. So tying it to the brick and mortar creates an employee base to control it. I just feel like we're opening a can of worms. I know it's going to happen, but you're just adding more. Here, everybody go and do it without, I think we need some restrictions on it. How do we know they're not going to go in and do chemical services such as coloring and waxing and pedicures, and even though we're saying in this language to limit it. And again, consumer protection, I understand if they're getting a background check and whatnot, but as we know, as unlicensed activity that is going on in our industry, would this again open up more of that kind of behavior with some of these app companies? So those are my thoughts. I have a lot of concerns of being so free, giving this so much freedom.
Based on one of the things you just said, I do have a question. Does that law regarding independent contractors, will it impact an app like that? Because the way that in some of our conversations about the labor law, I know that my understanding is currently booth renters technically cannot be independent contractors because everyone in the establishment is performing the same type of services, correct?
Right, so we're doing a lot of research on this. Basically, the word that we've gotten from DIR is it's so new they don't know yet.
Okay.
However, I have reached out to EDD and the old Board of Legalization, their new name now, and both of them have said they will not be changing their process. They do not plan on implementing the ABC test, that they plan on using the 30-year standard as always used before. So it's unclear right now. Nobody really knows. And since there's not been anything, ongoing, it's too new. It hasn't been tested.
Yeah.
We really don't know.
Okay.
Jackie, I appreciate your points. I like them. When I was going through what you had provided us, there were a couple of things that jumped out to me, which was that we say that the applicant needs to provides proof of liability and minimum amount. So I want to ensure when they have their insurance that they in order for them to get to their permit, it's not that they just carry, but they need to provide proof to it when they're applying for their. How is that process going to? Is that going to be able to work into that process? And then is there a way where if the person all of a sudden loses their insurance, can state board be notified by the insurance? I mean, you know how that works with some insurance carriers where it's it goes to a third party, but I don't know if that works, how that works when it comes to a state agency or something like that.
That's a good point, just because it happens with our
Yeah.
leases.
So I don't know. I mean, that's just something that we could take under advisement.
It would be requiring.
Yeah, but I'm saying, okay, I sign up for I sign up and I know it's a year-long permit, and then I show you my proof, but 30 days later my insurance gets canceled on me, but I still have my permit, and we don't know until inspections come, and then when it comes to the idea of enforcement on this, I've resided to the fact that you're never going to be able to enforce it in the participation thereof. And so that's why we're maintaining that we need to keep contact information on all of these people. So there's two things that kind of jump out at me. If we break down state board to its to its root, is that we're consumer protection. And the thing that when everyone goes into a brick and mortar establishment, what I've just done is we've updated that poster where it's just if you have any problems, you need to how do we ensure that information gets into every single person that they're basically performing services to, so that if they do have an issue with their service, that they know who to respond to or how they can direct their complaint process. And then the second issue would be, I guess, when it comes to inspection, is are we just going to basically develop some kind of survey where the inspector goes in, basically pulls a sample out of their clientele, and then sends them a survey and was did you follow when you were provided services by this person, was this, and this done? Did they use? I'm just trying to think of how the enforcement process is going to happen in this.
I had very similar thoughts regarding the message to consumer. I'm wondering if it would be too much to add that into the language to actually require that PSP holders present the message to consumer to every client that they serve, even though I know there's no way for us to really enforce that, but to require it. And the other item regarding the client information and whether or not the board, whether or not it would be an undue workload for our staff to be able to collect client information, so that we would require PSP holders to submit that information so we could do some type of evaluation per what Joe just mentioned, sending a follow-up survey or just ensuring that they're aware that they are being served by someone licensed by our board, and there are certain requirements that must be met. It seems like a lot, but given that we our purview as a board is really consumer protection by removing the establishment tie. If we decide to do that, how would we be able to ensure that consumers do not, are not susceptible to harm in their own homes? And they may not, and the problem is, I think we all have seen as board members through DRC, consumers don't always know that they're getting infections because they got a pedicure by someone who didn't disinfect their tools. That's not something that's commonly known by consumers. So I think that's the difficulty we have as a board to try to solve, is that consumers do not know how to protect themselves, number one, but we're trying to, allow our licensees free market to pursue whatever they choose, but it's a serious balance for us, and I'm not really sure what the answer is.
Question? I've really struggled on this one because there's some components of this I like. I know we're rather mandated by the legislature as how we have to participate and should participate in the personal service permit process. The problem, the primary problem that I've struggled with is health and safety issues. That is just key here. And it appears every way I look at this, we're toothless when it comes to that. We go out on inspections right now, and a salon that knows they're going to be inspected and are virtually standing by for an inspection that could happen at any moment, and who has a cheat sheet with them that we provide to show you what you can do to pass that inspection, 80 to 90% are cited for health and safety violations. So if that's the case there, how could we send someone out totally out of our control completely? I favor more of a process where the establishments are involved. At least we have someone standing by behind us, and there's a level of control at the establishment to determine, are these people ready to go out? Are they properly equipped? Do they understand the laws of going out? That's very important to them. It's like the safety of the public, it's not an aspirational goal of our board. It's an absolute mandate. And I think whenever we have to fall back, we have to look on that mandate. 90% of the businesses that are out there, the establishment businesses, are like 5-person small businesses. And if they had an exit of their employees to do something like this, and it may be ill-gotten on the success of whether they could do it or not, but they would be hurt. They would be hurt in this process. And we don't want to see these people hurt either. We want to see them survive. There's just so much that I think that we are at risk on the public safety side that I think it has to be locked into the establishment license. They need to be our eyes and ears in the inspection process. And I think that at least we have a chance of having some control. At least we have a chance of preventing the spread of disease or other safety problems if we have them involved in the process. So for that reason, I like the draft that we have of the personal service permit now. I mean, there's a couple of things also, may not be that important. The 50-mile radius. I see if they're really going to be involved in this, maybe it should be a 25-mile radius from the individual establishment. The concept being that people want to touch and see an establishment first to know the quality of the service they may expect of someone coming to their home. If they can touch that establishment, maybe they'll be more likely to do it. I think it's more likely they'll drive 25 miles than 50 miles on this sort of thing. But I like the idea, the concept of public service permits and what it can do as far as creating income rather easily, but I just don't think we could monetize public safety. So for that reason, I'm in support of the board draft.
So I think, as I'm listening to all of the discussion, I think that part of the problem that we're seeing is that a number of licensees in the state are starting to work in salon suites and aren't necessarily attached to establishments with an establishment owner. And I'll at least say from the DRC side, not many establishment owners are involved in the day-to-day services and business of the stylists and licensees that work in their establishment, because a large number of our industry is booth rental and independent contractors. And so part of the problem that I feel like we're coming up against is that because a number of our licensees aren't in establishments, it's going to be difficult to really enforce and implement this PSP with it being tied to an establishment. And I share some of the concerns being a part of drafting the original language as far as enforcement. And as Jackie said, you know, how are we going to be able to determine and reassure that they're not doing the other services listed? But I think that goes back to what Joe and Lisa said regarding making sure the public is aware that, and just really informing our consumers that there is an agency if there is an issue, if they do have a complaint that they can come to and make us aware of those issues. I will say one thing that I do like about the language that has been drafted is the limited services that are allowed to be performed in the home, that at least the sponsors of this particular permit agree that only certain services should be performed in the home. And I know that was also a concern, knowing that the scope of practice for cosmetology and barbering and aesthetics and manicuring, that there are services that may not be safe to perform in the home, that they did limit those services. But I think it's going to be difficult to really enforce it being tied to an establishment.
You know what? Yeah, what I echoing off of what Carrie was saying. It's like, you know, we received the letters from the assembly members and the Senate members, and we received this other letter, and we were mandated with this with our last sunset review. And you know, the idea is that they want a freelance artist. The be able to work free. They want people to be able to work freelance in this industry. And if you just, you know, you go back to the definition of freelance, it basically states that, you know, they're not being beholden to any kind of like establishment. And so you're going to be running into this. And it's like, and I do support that it should be part of this establishment thing, but I just kind of like feeling these political winds of kind of how this thing's going to probably end up playing out. I feel like we're going to be forced to eat the shark sandwich, as I'd say.
And it's happening. I
Yeah.
mean, we know already that services are happening outside of an establishment. I mean, it's been happening for years if we think about weddings and proms. Yes.
So just to clarify a couple of things from your comments, I totally agree that we should add something in to require some type of handout to the consumer for the consumer message. That alone is getting us so much more than what we have right now, because we know it's happening, and it's happening without any of our input whatsoever. I think there are a lot of people that are going to take advantage of the personal service permit and be very successful and probably hand out that flyer every time they go to someone's location. When it comes to enforcement, we would handle this type of enforcement like we handle consumer harm cases right now. So when we get a complaint right now for a consumer harm, we can't go into the salon and do an inspection to recreate what happened. It's more involved than that. It's more of an investigation than an inspection. So while we're out there doing random inspections and noticing all the health and safety standard violations that we see so commonly, when we have a consumer harm complaint, we do further work on that, which would usually involve an expert consultant that we would work for. Because again, if somebody gets harmed, we can't recreate that scene in a salon, in a home. We have to look at both sides of the story and determine what happened, and have an expert usually look at the entire case and give us their opinion. That's how we handle consumer harm cases now. That's the only way I see that we would be able to handle cases from a PSP right now. We'd have to look at the facts of both sides of the story. Right now, we're not getting complaints from people that are in homes. I don't believe we have any record of a complaint of because it is so common, and we all know it's been common forever that brides are getting their hair done, and hair and makeup done, and we haven't had any complaints. So I just wanted to make a note of that. I think the enforcement is just, while we can inspect the actual salon where services were performed, you still can't recreate when we go into those salons. So if we go into a salon and that complaint says that their salon was filthy, but we go in 2 days later and it's perfectly clean, we're in the same situation. Keeping of the client information, I think, would be astronomical to our board, but I do think it's something that we should require. I think that they should, if they're doing a PSP, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't want to keep track of that so that that we could view that if needed somehow.
So, I just want to go back. Since, I mean, it seems like you'd almost have to create a whole nother kind of inspections unit. I mean, for this PSP, where it's, I mean, it would, with our current staff, wouldn't this be overburdensome by kind of creating this whole personal service permit and then knowing that it's not going to be able to really fall upon our normal inspectors to investigate?
Well, that's only if there's consumer harm.
Okay. So only if the time. Then
right.
Then what about the idea of like a regular normal inspection? How would that go about that?
There wouldn't be an inspection. There's nothing to inspect.
So okay. So I want to run a theoretical by you. We have policies for basically minimum standards for a salon. Would someone be able to get a PSP, right? And the idea is that you're outward bound for PSP. Would someone be able to get a PSP and but still work out of their house, but not like, so they're basically using their house as their studio? How would we know?
How do we know now?
I understand that, but
PSP
is
for them to go if they're doing it in their home, and we get a complaint on that home, which we do, and we go to that home, and that's a home salon. We already have statutory authority for an in-home salon and requirements. So we would cite them for unlicensed in their home. If they're operating, if they've built their garage into a salon, they need to have an establishment license.
But if they have just a PSP and there was they work out of their home, it's like, oh, well.
The PSP is for them to travel.
I understand that, but
Right.
the PSP is a freelance, so if I'm going to work from freelance, I'm going to do it wherever I need to. I mean, hey, there's a park bench open up over here, so let's go work on over there. That way I don't have to sweep up afterwards. I'm just.
Yeah.
The scariest part about this is that, you're saying that people do it already, but they're not doing it with the blessing of the state board now. But we're now providing the blessing.
And I worry about the new ones getting out of school, not being set up for success and just getting out and going and working on an app. And they don't know what they're doing. I just feel like I understand it's health and safety that we need to care about, but we need to care about our students and what they're going into when they get out of school.
I know this might be creating another barrier of entry, which will be complained about, but did we ever look into, for someone to apply for this, they must have at least 2 years of good standing of holding a license, or, 5 years, whatever? Did we ever, I'm trying to remember back to our discussions, did we ever discuss something like that? And if so, why did we reject that?
I do think it came up in some of the discussions, but it didn't make it into the final language.
Because I'm wondering, if someone graduates from school, goes and gets a person, never steps foot in an establishment, doesn't know, they're just a rookie, they're just going around, we're just, going on the faith of our license exams, that you're able to pass it, so you know what you're doing, and never seeing an inspection.
Not having any experience.
No experience, nothing, you sign up for,
Well, I think the way that the industry is going already, a lot of students are coming out and becoming booth runners as it is. And But, the difference would be that if they ran their own establishment, we would be enforcing by sending inspectors. And so there is that slight difference, but I mean, I don't know that the PSP would create anything new that isn't already happening. Like, I think that there are already a lot of students who are probably not aware of the regulations and think that they can do these services on their own, because it's definitely happening. There are plenty of people doing makeup, doing lashes in their homes, going to other people's homes. So I think it's a chicken before. I understand like what you're saying, that we're opening a new can of worms, but to me, it's not really opening anything. It's like it's a can of worms that's already been there.
Sure, and I agree with you. I know it's been there, and it's something that we can help control, but also we need to put some limits on it. I think just saying, okay, well, this is what everybody's doing, we need to, here you go. Now at least we can watch you, is what this is saying. But if we give so much freedom to it, I mean, so many people drop out of our industry. 2 out of 10 will stay, and they're done, and they go, and then they're going to be in doing something like this, not able to make an income, or they go booth rent and they do it for 6 months and quit, and then they default on their loans. I mean, I just want us to be smart and not just give in just because.
Is it possible to put some type of, for the sake of the conversation and the concern of students coming out, some type of like be licensed for at least a year before applying for a PSP? Okay. I mean, just to add to some of Jackie's concern and being a licensee as well, I'm just thinking about the possibility of consumer harm when you are in school. A lot of it is about health and safety, but the practice of actually being and serving the public on a day-to-day basis, I do feel that that level of experience should be required before actually they just go into someone's house. Like, you've never worked on the public before, you just got out of school, and it could help reduce maybe some of the consumer harm complaints that we could get if we are giving our stamp of approval and saying, okay, we know this is happening, now we're going to say it's okay, that at least our new students know there has to be some level of experience before they can just knock on someone's door.
Question: if someone has a PSP and they get a complaint lodged against them, and then their PSP is up for renewal, will that complaint then prevent them from renewing their PSP? Or would they just be like, is there a limit to how many complaints they could have for doing before their PSP may be subject for removal or anything like that?
That doesn't exist now for any of our license types.
No, I understand.
So
that.
if we wanted to clarify something for PSP, it would have to be added. What does exist right now is fines have to be, if you have outstanding fines.
That's the only thing that
But
exists.
that's it.
Obviously, there's no perfect solution to this, and we'll just have to, at the end of the day, weigh what's, even to say that the least harm is not usually good enough. I think I agree to an extent that we should have some type of requirement that Andrew was talking about, like a number of years, but how do you prove that again? And then are they subject to establishments holding them hostage also to prove that they have been with an establishment for so long or not? Again, there's no perfect solution to this. I do like the idea that a requirement of handouts, and they need to prove that they actually did handouts. So when we get a consumer complaint, that the consumer was informed. It's almost like reading someone the Miranda rights. You have the right to be silent, that was actually said. I know that you said earlier, Christy, about the harm when someone report that. And obviously, I'm not sure that there's a solution to this, that we are proactive with establishment, that we can inspect it before the harm is done. And in this case, it's difficult. While I like the idea of connecting to an establishment, I really feel that it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. Although not scientific, from the few people that I've spoken to, they like the idea of the PSP, but they will never want to be attached to an establishment, whether online or not. And they're just not going to register. It's happening already. Why do I need it if I don't have to? They'll just take the chance. So realistically, while it might serve some good purpose to be connected to establishment, I really don't think it's going to happen. The number of people that will do this is probably not the number that we would like to have some control over.
I agree with what Coco's saying. I don't think that it's something, as hard as we want to try to control, I think the way that the industry is growing and consumer choices are moving forward in a way that I think is going to drastically change this industry. And I know that we are kind of placing blame on apps like Glam Squad, but the reality is I don't even think that a majority of the PSP holders will be working for an app or like a Glam Squad. I think they will be working on their own because that's already what's been happening. And I think what we can do is create a best practices guide for PSP holders in terms of what the board would like to see them to do. I think we can work with the Glam Squads of the app world and try to implement best practice on their end by working with them and asking of them, making clear what our board is looking for. And hopefully they can I actually see it as an opportunity to perhaps increase awareness on the consumer side of what the board's purview actually is. And that with things like an app, if Glam Squad is willing to work with us to actually notify users that they can actually issue a complaint to our board if they're dissatisfied, because they received some type of health issue due to their service or whatever. I know it's a long shot to ask a business to work in partnership for something like this, but if they were willing to push that out to their consumer base, we would actually probably reach more people with that message than we currently do right now with a poster in a salon, because I doubt anyone reads it, even though it's there for them to look at.
And just to note, the Glam Squad people have been very forthcoming and great to work with. It's just one app that happened to decide to want to work with us. There's so many. This PSP started with a company called Manicube. Some of you might remember. They're no longer around, so that's unfortunate. But there's so many apps that are out there right now, and none of them have come to even work with us other than Glam Squad. So Glam Squad, I know a lot of people thought that Glam Squad was behind SB 999, and they weren't. They want their people to be licensed, and they want their people to, they think that's very important. So we're saying Glam Squad a lot because fortunately, they're the only ones who have just wanted to actually work with us, as opposed to there's so many apps out there.
Priv is another one, and you see it on TV all the time because they wear the Priv shirts.
Exactly.
And they're in California doing people's hair already and advertising it on TV shows. So I do know it happens, and I do think a lot of people will work for the apps because the marketing's done for them, right? You don't have to do anything but go to work for an app and they're going to get you the clients. So, which is, it is what it is in our industry. It's just going to create more underground income, I really believe. And I know that's not our concern, except we tell people how they should get paid. But if the app's going to give them, we'll give you 50% of the service that you're going to go do, for one, so say they give them 50% of that service. Well, because that app doesn't have to pay workman's comp, match taxes, any of that stuff, insurance. It's all on this individual. And then at the end, they're like, I got $50 out of that. And they're not thinking about what they need to pay out of that. It is what it is, but it's definitely going to create, as we have these task force now, I've been working with for this underground income. But I know, I don't know the answer to this. I
Can
just
I-
think we need to think again.
Guys, one of the same things we seem to be doing, we seem to be focused on those people we call unscrupulous that are working under the radar right now and illegally doing it. Maybe our focus as a board shouldn't be so much to the unscrupulous, but rather to the people that would be willing to follow our directions and would be able to follow our advice on this. I think that's a much more positive approach to doing this. There's always going to be people, no matter what it is, they aren't going to do it. They aren't going to get licensed at all, and they're still going to do it. But if we start attacking it with enough controls on it to get this thing launched where we feel somewhat safe about what's going to happen to the public, and again, I agree, the public, in this profession, the public has no knowledge of what's happening as far as health and safety violation. They have no clue in what we require of these establishments and have them do. So it's a hard thing to read from the public's perception, but I just think we need to get some controls and launch this thing with as many controls that we can have, hands-on that we can have in many areas to make sure it does the right thing for the people there.
So could we put on here, could we amend and put something that where they're gonna require, the individual is gonna hand the handout of what we don't know that they're doing, but hopefully, like, I agree. Hopefully I agree that, if the apps would be willing to put the information on there.
We can add today to this language whatever the board
So that
decides.
they're getting the
And I'm
information.
hoping you will do that and get a motion to approve whatever we come up with so that we can move forward with the regulatory process, which you know takes quite some time.
Right.
And you will see again, and the public will have lots of opportunities for the input as well once we start the formal regulatory process.
Okay.
Well, I was gonna, suggest, I don't know, I was trying to develop a motion for two different things. It might be two separate motions, but one, I like the requiring the leaving of the language of our, if you have trouble, contact us, kind of a thing. Leaving it with the client somehow. And I want it somehow, I'd like to see it left on a receipt or something like that, as opposed to a iTunes, click here if you've read your terms of services, which nobody reads, and then it disappears, and want something left with, on a receipt, even if it's an emailed receipt, just language at the bottom. If you have issues, contact, whatever the languages we have on the PDF that it display somehow physically left with the client, as opposed to just a checkbox, I acknowledge this kind of a thing. The other thing I was wondering, and I still, do we want to make some kind of requirement for length of license holding time to be able to apply? You must be a licensee for at least a year in good standing or something like that before, Now that might be someone graduates school, passes, gets their license, does nothing for a year, and then they're eligible, but at least they've had that license for a minimum amount of time before applying for a PSP.
I do like some of the suggestions that are being made. I think in order to help us shape a motion, because we have a bunch of proposed regulatory language already, how does everyone feel about the proposed regulatory language? And maybe we can work from the draft and add the additional things that we would like to see. Because with the draft that we've been given, knowing that we've had a lot of discussion about the reality of this PSP being tied to an establishment, the new draft does not tie the PSP to an establishment, but there are other requirements. So if everyone could just take a look and see how you feel about that, and then we can add our amendments to the draft.
I think the revised draft, staff did like the addition of 2B. Is that correct? Right. So that is something that we would want to keep, I think.
So can we make it just a single motion to accept the revised draft then?
Well, I want to add to it.
But then I'm saying, then can we just start adding other motions on top of that, like just piecemeal it out, take it one at a time, or does it have to all be done in one thing?
Well, I think for this one, staff is still going to have to create another draft and present it to the board at the next meeting.
Okay.
So, and I think we've been all taking notes about what your suggested amendments are. So you could just have one amendment to direct staff to implement the changes that the board discussed today and to bring back another draft version at the next meeting. That way, we can have the exact language for you, and we don't have to craft that now. Because if you wanted to do it now, we'd have to craft exactly what it was going to say, as well as what, if you want to have some sort of a message to consumer handed out. If there was a specific document, then we'd have to have that language also ready. So that's what I would suggest is just one motion for staff to work on the changes that were discussed today.
I like it. You're making it easier for us.
Why on the draft that we have and then the revised draft they have, did they take out provides a certificate that they have completed within a year of submitting their application to OSHA compliant blood-borne pathogen training class? They took that all out. Is there, just explain to me why. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I'm not sure exactly why on that, but I did want to remind you all that in our health and safety course that students are all required to take, there is a section on blood-borne pathogens. I mean, you guys you already knew that before when you asked for it to be included in this, but I did just want to, remind you that they're already getting some training from us.
Thank you.
In the interest of other things, I was just thinking, since I suggested putting a length of term of a licensee, we might want to also consider language that if they were a licensee in another state, that applies. So they don't just have to be a California licensee, i.e. if I moved from New York and I've been licensed without any issues for 4 years and then I moved to California, I think I should be able to apply or be eligible for a PSP here.
So include a reciprocal.
Kind of, yeah, if you
Include a reciprocal
if you have that
arrangement.
length of time outside of California, it's not just a California licensee for am I making sense here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a version of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I would like to go ahead and start with a motion. I move that we accept the revised draft of the PSP and allow staff to make changes to that language based on the conversation and suggestions we've had here today. And present us with an updated draft at our next meeting.
I'll second.
I'm just curious, is that accept? Is that saying that we're taking this as is and then, are we, do we just want to look at a revised based on our comments, or are we accepting this with additions being made?
Or perhaps use the revise as a
The
template,
revised draft.
As a basis.
as a basis.
Yeah, use this as a basis and then add to it the app, putting on, health and safety on the apps. Must be licensed for, 2 years, require the handouts to just add to this.
Okay, so let
Or
me
no?
amend my motion. Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
If I could clarify your motion.
Okay.
If I could clarify, we want to make sure we're going to take the revised draft as it is. And we are going to add that they must be licensed for 2 years. That they must have a handout for the consumer notice based on our discussion today. They must maintain client information upon request. Is that all right?
Can I just clarify that part about client information? Because you're specifically listing certain things like names, addresses, and telephone. That's very specific. If we're going to be specific, I would probably add email address or something. Most people use email these days. Or just leave specifics out, just client information. I don't know. What's the best way?
So let me ask the board what they want to accomplish by client information. If you want it to come to us, we have nowhere to store that information. None. So I don't know how we would even maintain it.
Yeah, in fact, current establishments, they don't really maintain full information like addresses. Mostly people call for an appointment with a name and possibly a phone number. We don't even ask for addresses. And I think
Well, the address is
there
because
should be
they're
a
traveling.
privacy issue involved here too.
Well, I was saying the address is because they're actually going to the person's home. Where normally.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
right. Yeah.
I think when we asked about including that, it was jumping off of a point that Joe had brought up, which had to do with surveying the consumers. And I just don't know if that's a step that we can even take, or if it's something we want to implement in the first phase of rolling this out, the first year, that we want to ensure that we've done due diligence in surveying consumers who have been served by PSP holders. It was just an idea to really evaluate public health.
Are you more interested in knowing if they have given the clients the board information so that they know who to contact if there is a problem? Or are you interested in the type of work that they are providing?
I feel like it'd be the type of work they're doing. It seems like you should be able to send out a survey where it's like, did they use because we state that they have to use disposable implements. Did they use disposable implements? Did they do this? Did they do that? Like, it just seems like that's the only way. You're never going to be able to do an on-site inspection, and by saying that you're never going to be able to inspect them at all, just kind of feels like you're giving up. So to be able to have some kind of some kind of like retroactive like evaluation where you can at least kind of gauge and see if that is.
So is there a possibility that we could add that survey to the consumer notice and then maybe keep a log where the client has to sign that they've received it?
I just question the privacy of those consumers, and that I, as a consumer myself, I don't know that if a government agency contacted me because of my haircut that I got last week, I would probably question that. So I think we have to be careful on how we would reach directly consumers, and what we would be doing with that information. So to me, it would be better if we required the holder of the personal service permit to maintain records. We don't require that of establishments right now, so this is a step up that they would have to do, and that upon request, they would have to provide that information to the board. It would be, I see it as being similar to other boards who have continuing education, and they have to complete the continuing education. It's a random audit by boards to make sure that those other entities are actually completing it. So I think of it kind of as that way. I just am concerned about us receiving that information of all the consumers in California and where that could leave us with some privacy issues.
Christy, can I also, on that number 7, where the applicant agrees to provide for purpose of resolving consumer complaints and then all the other language, that's assuming that we receive a consumer complaint. And if we get a consumer complaint, they will provide us with the name of person who already, who provided the service if we receive a complaint. So I really think it's irrelevant that the other consumers that this person has serviced will relate to the consumer complaint specifically. So I'm not really sure the necessity of that log.
Basically what we're saying, I mean, I understand what Joe was trying to do, but basically what we're saying is we're giving up protecting the consumer in the home from any kind of, I mean, we'll deal with complaints, but any kind of inspection, any kind of oversight in that sense will not apply to PSP holders because there's no way to survey them, to inspect them. That's basically what we're kind of saying. And then we're also saying, hey, establishment owners, as a perk of being an establishment owner, you get to be inspected by us. So we are creating 2 different levels of classifications here, and we're saying these people get to be inspected, and these people aren't gonna be inspected. I mean, that's what we're doing. And I just wanna make sure we're all clear, and legislators who are hearing this are aware too, that that's what we're being asked to do.
Two classes of citizen.
Of licensees.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I do think that when consumers make the choice of inviting a service into their own home, I think that they are taking on that liability ultimately, right?
Yeah, until they complain.
Until they complain. I think by going into an establishment, you're right. I think we are creating two entirely separate class categories because an establishment owner takes on the liability of consumers that enter their space. And the PSP holders ultimately will not. Well, they do have the insurance policy that they are required to have. But you're right.
And not to belabor the point even more, but once again, if you own a brick and mortar establishment, you have more hard associated costs with that, which also now includes inspections and fines, because you are not getting fined when you have your personal service permit, because unless you get a complaint, and if you get a complaint, you're not going to really get a fine from it. You're going to, get the ire of the state board and go through that whole process. But hey, man, just because you got a little bit of hair on the ground and you decided to pay rent on that building, we're going to treat you differently.
Can I ask a question, licensee clarification? So if a person is currently licensed and works in an establishment with the PSP, will we grandfather them in and allow them to work outside the establishment? Or they would require a separate license to do that?
They would just require the
P.
Which is more money.
Which is, another
It's
$100.
a separate certification, a separate fee.
Do they have to go through the exams again, or just the?
No, but they would have to keep up their regular license, their cosmetologist license, as well as their PSP.
They just have an additional fee that they'd have to pay every year instead of paying their license fees every 2 years. Is it a 2 year?
I think we want to make it 2 years.
Oh, you want to make this 2 years as well?
So I think
In a
that
perfect world, it should be tied right to their cosmetologist license or whatever license so that it can be renewed at once, which would be a lot less administrative functions for the
No,
board.
I understand that.
And just to add to the conversation we're having about there being two different types of licensees, I think we just have to accept the reality, though, that again, there's no way for us to reasonably enforce or have inspections for those who carry the PSP. So I think that the way that it's listed, that upon request, and as Christy stated, if we do random audits, I mean, that's the closest we're probably going to get to it, as uncomfortable and as unfair as it is for those who do take on the responsibility of an establishment. This is something that we know we have to do. We know the reality is we're not going to be able to tie it to an establishment. So I think the closest we're going to get is this upon request
Well,
audit.
thank God it's not in our charter that we protect clients and consumers.
Do we have any additional conversation? I know I had started a motion that I need to definitely amend. Any additional questions or comments before I restate my motion? Okay, so I'm going to restate my motion, and I move that we adopt the revised draft of the personal service permit and allow staff to adjust and amend the language based on the recommendations we've made here today.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there any public comment?
I appreciate that PSP is even in motion, so thank you all. I'm Miley, I'm the founder of BGlammed, arguably Glam Squad's top competitor. What's interesting is you had mentioned you hadn't heard from any of the other apps. We've been in contact with the board since prior to us launching over 4 years ago, and then again recently with Glam Squad in this motion for PSP. So that's just one thing there. So maybe we're not talking to the right people at the board. One thing that I took away from was one of your main concerns I wanted to address, which is plucking recent graduates out of school and putting them to work right away. I would question as to why you would think that these apps are hiring new graduates. In a lot of the conversations I've had with CEOs of the other companies and apps that are out there, we all have very thorough vetting processes for how we hire these freelance professionals. And most of them don't hire recent graduates. I know we definitely don't as well. We do require a certain amount of years for experience, which I like the idea of putting a year minimum on the PSP for how long they've had a cosmetology license. I think that's a great idea. And also tying it to the cosmetology license, which is 2 years. Another thing that I heard was 90% of the businesses that you regulate are a 5-person team or smaller, and your concern is that you want to protect them. But what about the rest of the population of cosmetologists who have their license, who can't find work at a salon because the salons are suffering right now, and they're not making the money that they used to make? Don't you want to protect the licensees that you have that are actual cosmetologists? And I really believe that with the licensing issue, or not so much the licensing, but the establishment issue of the complaints, I had heard that most of the complaints are coming from home-based salons that are unregulated, or they're coming from salons specifically, and you rarely receive complaints about in-home or on-demand services. And I think part of that is because the issues are not an issue of the service provider, it's an issue of the establishment owner, and not regulating their providers that are in their space and upholding the sanitation practices that the Board of Cosmetology puts into place. As well as just one of the other big concerns is that I really feel that we could work together, the app world could work together with the board to enforce PSP. We become the barrier, you hold us accountable for ensuring that the licensings are valid, because all of our providers have to have a license and it's active. And because we use an online CRM program, it actually sends us a notification when their cosmetology licenses expire. And we go out to them and reach out to them 7 to 10 days in advance of the expiration date. If they don't send us a new copy of their expiration or of their current license, we actually suspend their profile, so they cannot work with our app until they've renewed their licenses. So that's something that we can do to help enforce PSP, and I think we could be the barrier where you hold us accountable for making sure that the providers are actually withholding this personal service permit. As well as the handout. I think that's a great idea. Currently, we leave a handout with our clients. When the services are done, we leave a card with them saying, thank you for booking us. Here's a code to use this again. Feel free to leave us a review. It would be nothing for us to add a second copy or even add to our copy about the PSP languages and also the protection as the consumer and the client. So I think that that's something that we'd be totally willing to do and to work with the board on. Another thing is the that the establishments, a concern was that the establishments aren't involved with PSP, and I think we can be. We absolutely can be. We want to be. Between Priv, Glam Squad, BGlammed, we're multi-million-dollar businesses. And before we launched in any state, at least for BGlammed, we went to the Board of Cosmetology and spoke with them before we launched. So we try to do our diligence as much as possible. So I'm glad that now 4 years later this is coming up, because we'd be totally happy to work with you guys to ensure that that is something that's regulated. And you know, I'm happy that SB 999 was retracted. Unregulating licenses would be the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. So that's just kind of I wanted to say my piece is coming from somebody who owns one of these apps. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Does your app, are you working now in California with your app?
In California.
Oh.
In California. And prior to us launching, we had been in contact with the board for about 3 months in conversations with them. And we were told that there's no regulations technically against what we were doing. There's also no regulations for what we could and could not do. Therefore, we're operating in a gray area, and we don't want to operate in a gray area. We want to be legal. We want to be meeting all of the standards and all of the regulations. And again, we're putting cosmetologists to work, and they're making money through us, and they're making money on their own. And I really feel like the app world has regulated even what they do. We have providers that come to us. And when I say providers, I mean licensees. That come to us and they have to do a technical audition, and sanitation is the number one thing that we look for. We go through their kits, we ensure they have the right implements and sanitation practices, different chemicals, anything like that that the board requires. Being somebody who's on the board of advisors for some cosmetology schools, I definitely take that very seriously, and we've instilled that standard with our programming. We want to do that legally. We want to work with you guys. We really want to be in regulation, believe me. So this is actually, I think this is a great thing that the conversation is on the table, and you can continue to see me at each one of these meetings to activate for it. But what I do love, too, is I'm hearing that you're not all against it, but you're not all for it. So the conversation is going to continue, and it's not just getting shut down right away. So
Can I just ask you also, does your app allow consumers that use the service to sort of rate the?
absolutely.
Okay.
They have to rate. And also for liability insurance, we not only cover our providers, we also work with a group called the Elite Beauty Society, who are the biggest insurance providers in North America. And we work with them to ensure that our providers get insurance through them, and they offer.
Does your app tell the consumers what rights they have in case they have complaints, and what are those?
We currently have very light terms in our terms and conditions. As you said, I believe you said on the app world, you click a button, nobody actually reads it. We want to be in regulation, so we'd be happy to add that verbiage and also do the leave behind with our clients as well, so that they know what they're protected against.
So it allows them to, I mean, you tell them their rights, and they can, is there recourse against the app if they have a complaint?
Right now, if they have a complaint, we take on that complaint, and then we evaluate the service provider who did that. The recourse has been we go above and beyond for our clients, anything that we can to retract that. Thankfully, to this day, knock on wood, we've never had any health issues that have come with any of the complaints. It's mostly service providers late, or they weren't happy with the style that they received. Luckily, it hasn't been any health issues or any theft. We do thorough background checks before we send any providers out on location. So we try to be as diligent as we can. And like I said, I'm just happy that this conversation is happening so that we can become more regulated and help the board regulate the other freelancers who I call rogue, who are out there doing it without licenses, without insurance, and don't know that they need to have that.
May I ask you a couple questions about your app? Do you employ the stylists?
No, independent contractor.
Okay. Now, my next question is, what's your cut, if you don't mind me asking?
It's a 60% commission off of the service. The provider gets that. And they also get 15% gratuity on top of that as well.
A standard 15% gratuity?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the gratuity is offered at the end of the service. So clients, if they feel like they don't want to leave gratuity, they don't have to, but we do offer that.
So you get 40% for basically facilitating the transaction?
Yeah, and I've heard, we take on the marketing, we provide them with the clientele, and then we do withhold 40%. Be glammed.
I have a question also. Have you ever looked at the possibility of, in your business methodology, to either become an establishment or partner with establishments?
Yes, yeah, we absolutely have. And part of that was in our early conversations with the board before we launched about having our license tied to a brick and mortar. And what we find is we're more of a platform that connects pros with clients. We're not the service providers. So we technically cannot be licensed. And we don't do any services at our home office. We don't have a sink. We don't have salon chairs. We don't offer anything inside of basically our headquarters. We don't do services there. So we couldn't get a license even if we wanted to.
Providers need to bring all their own supplies to do the services.
Yes, they bring their own supplies.
So you don't supply anything for them.
We don't supply anything. And that's also walking a fine line, I'm sure, with may or may not know the independent contractor versus employee rights, and part of that is we don't train them for the services that they do. They have to be great at what they do when they come to us. We cannot provide them with the tools that they need to get their job done, and they also don't make their full-time income from us as well. All right, well, thank you. Appreciate your time.
I imagine the board members feel a little bit like the childhood tale about the Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, watching the rest of the dam crumble around you. I certainly feel that way today. I would say that I agree with Member Weeks that it should be tied to an establishment, but I also understand that we as a body are a creature of the legislature, and I saw what happened the last time we were sunset with the deaths and the myriad of infections that happened under Bureau, and I don't want that ever to happen again. So we have to tread cautiously. So without being a salon-based, the last speaker actually brought up an idea that I hadn't thought of. Why not create them as a licensed establishment? You don't have to be an industry member to be a licensed establishment. We have many, many people in this industry that have never been to school. And so they claim in their testimony today that they want to be responsible. Let's make them responsible. It's very simple. And so that would then put them at least responsible, at least for having, under the law or the regulations, a licensed individual going to someone's home. I would tell you that I've watched this happening. Let's take Uber and Lyft for an example. You now have General Motors developing the Wave program within their company, if you haven't heard of it. Let me explain it to you simply. It's a shared ownership or lease ownership for people who want to work within this industry or share a car with neighbors because they see what's happening in the industry, especially with automated cars coming. So let's look at the industry of ride haulers or Airbnb and what has happened. Well, we're losing probably somewhere in the neighborhood over years of several million cab drivers. So you're going to see a shrinking of salons with these apps. There's no way around it. We have 55,000 salon licenses now. My guess within 10 years there'll be half that amount. That's a guess, but I don't think it's a bad guess. So in recognizing all of these problems, I think we have to tread lightly. I like the idea of spending some time in the industry before they're licensed to do the personal services. Again, think very carefully about at least some responsibility for this app and making sure that licensed people are going. And I did have a thought while I was sitting here about a conversation I had with our past sheriff in our county and currently on the Board of Supervisors about wanting to train people in our county jails to do licensed opportunities when they leave because of the independent contractor licenses. They wouldn't have to actually work for somebody or apply for a job. But it also raised the issue of this would be for wise criminals, a way to get into homes to case them out. So I think we may see some of this too, but probably limited. These apps will be used for nefarious purposes too. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Tanique Jones-Bell, and I am a licensed cosmetologist. Been licensed, I actually went to Federico I graduated 2003. I'm really excited about this revised draft for the PSP. And I have a very unique experience because not only am I a consumer of freelancers, I am also a freelancer. I just want to share my perspective with you guys. My mother is physically handicapped, and she's also experiencing the first stages of dementia. So I can't have her go into a licensed establishment because she acts out. So unfortunately, I have to hire freelancers to come do my mom's hair, and it's amazing for us because she even has issues in cars sometimes going to places. So I just have to say I love this because of that as a consumer. And I do know that hiring a licensed professional, they went to school and they learned about health and all that stuff. So I trust them when they come in my home to service my mom. A reason why I chose to be a freelancer is because of my mom's condition. Working in a brick and mortar salon, I cannot break for a minute to go handle my mom's issues, unfortunately. Salons don't like that stuff. they don't like the schedule that I need to help with my mother. So I actually love that there's an opportunity for me to have a licensing that allows me to have the schedule I need to have to take care of my mother and be a freelancer while I do this. Another point I wanted to make, just kind of addressing some of the questions that were brought up. I actually have applied for apps, and the apps do require, as the owner of Be Glammed said, they do require licensing. So when you do apply, they also a lot of the times ask that you have been licensed for at least 2 years and had 2 years of experience before you even think about coming onto the app. So that's all that they have, like prerequisites before you even get to apply there. They do kit checks. They actually watch you do everything to make sure you have sanitation. If not, you're not in. Like, that's just how it goes with them. So as far as all these questions about the apps and if they're doing things right with regulations, they are. So I just wanted to kind of put those things to rest a little bit. And another thing I wanted to tell you guys is, yes, it has been going on a long time as far as freelancers go for weddings, for proms. Nobody wants to take their whole wedding party to an establishment. It's way too much money. It's way too inconvenient, especially all of these people that are doing destination weddings here in California. I have serviced from the Bay Area through Southern California, and I'm telling you, these people do not want to go pay, I don't know, $5,000 a salon to have to rent out the salon for 3 hours and then have their wedding party travel to the area that they have to go to. I think that this revised draft of the PSP is amazing, and I hope that you guys go ahead and go through with it and pass it because I'm really excited about it. So thank you for allowing me to share that with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Delaney Hunter. I'm the managing partner of California Advisors LLC. I'm here on behalf of Glam Squad. I want to first thank you.
Can you guys hear her in the back?
Is that better?
Yes? Okay. Yeah, if you can speak loud, that'll be great. Thank you.
Certainly. First, I want to thank you for the robust discussion and the effort that you have all put into the PSP. Glam Squad's mission is to help licensed beauty professionals connect with clients in a flexible and empowering way, and to help consumers find the services that meet their needs. In recognition of the changing marketplace and consumer demands, we sincerely appreciate your attention with the PSP, and thank you for the action around the revised draft. I will commit to you, we are happy to work with this board on an ongoing basis around notice and best practices. We'd be happy to do that. I think we want to think about what the requirement would be relative to licensing. Again, our platform does require participants on our platform to have 2 years experience. The question is that comparable across the industry? Which is, if I graduate with 1,600 hours, if I get a license, can I walk into an establishment and get a job? And the answer is yes, I can. So are you creating a false gap between what could happen in an establishment versus an app or in a freelance space? Because we offer that, it's because our clientele demand that kind of requisite. The question is that the same requirement for every licensee that happens to participate in the space? So the question is comparability between licensees. We will continue to be available at your need, and we'll continue to participate in these hearings and in any way we can to ensure that the consumer protection that you all need and want happens, and that our clientele continue to get the flexibility that they need. And thank you for your time.
I don't know how to move it. I think it's okay. I'll kneel down. I'm never quite this tall. This seems very odd. Good afternoon, Ms. President, Vice President Laura Bennett with TechNet. I'm the Executive Director of our Technology Association here in California, and we happen to have Glam Squad as a member, and we advocate on technology issues across the nation, ensuring that we have a competitive playing field when you talk about technology and how you regulate those technologies, and when you talk about just people in the traditional service industry. Some of the things that were mentioned today and how you direct folks that are doing an application through a platform and disclosing those consumer protections. I just ask that when you consider those implications on how you provide the information on the user interface to the consumers, that you do that in a thoughtful manner, and that can also be complied with when you have people not using an application, such as not going through Beglammed or Glam Squad, but just having a personal services permit on their own, that they too can comply with that disclosure and notice. I also asked, similar to the previous speaker, that any type of restrictions that you're placing on people with a personal services permit and getting that application, that is also when you are opening up a salon. If I had the 1,600 hours, I am a licensed professional. I should be able to do both of those things. I want to also thank you all for having the very robust discussion today and accepting the revised draft that we also worked on with Glam Squad. We'd be happy to work on any of the language that you are considering putting forth, specific as it relates to applications. We are protective of technology, and we want to have that consideration made. So I'd be happy to have those conversations. So thank you for the time today.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
Are you okay with 1,600 hours being a requirement for a licensee?
I don't have an opinion on
You
the
don't have an opinion
requirements of that. We're not specific to that. We're specific to that, how it relates to when you have technology in play.
Okay.
Madam President, board members, good morning again. David Wolf with the R Street Institute. And I do feel compelled to make a couple of brief comments here. First of all, the 2-year delay after you get a barbering and cosmetology license before you get a PSP seems rather arbitrary to me. And the example I'd bring up here is Uber and Lyft. Do you need an automobile license for 2 years before you can sign up with Uber and Lyft to drive? And the answer is no. If strangers are getting into automobiles where they run the risk of dying in an accident with an inexperienced driver who doesn't have their license very long, I mean, we're talking about hairstyling here, okay? The risk of death is dramatically lower than that. So, comment number one. And, comment number two, in terms of these stylists having no experience before, after they get their licensure, and when they get a PSP, they do have 1,600 hours of education and training. How much more experience do you need to be able to go into business for yourself and do that? Why does there need to be a 2-year delay? So thank you.
Question I asked the previous person. Are you okay with 1,600 hours being okay for a licensee?
Mr. Drabkin, the R Street Institute did introduce SB 999, which, as you know, removed licensure requirements for shampooing and other hairstyling applications. So 1,600 hours, the answer is no. However, we're always open and willing to be able to come back to this board and have this discussion about appropriate licensure requirements and what's appropriate, and that's why I do like to see the hairstyling licensure that was talked about today. I still think 1,300 hours is too many, but I think you're moving in the right direction.
Madam Chair, just a quick clarifying point about the Uber comment. According to Uber's website, the minimum requirements to drive, you have to have at least 1 year of licensed driving experience in the U.S., 3 years if you're under the age of 23.
Thank you. And I mean, being in the industry myself, I care about the hair industry and my craft, and experience is important. And I feel like it's just saying we're just hairdressers, and we're more than that.
Fred Jones, Professional Beauty Federation, California. Just on that point of experience, for out-of-staters, they need 3 years of experience to be able to apply. So if you're looking for a non-arbitrary threshold, you may consider that, because it's already on code. I will say, generally speaking, you are going to have a sunset review next year. From that sunset review, the legislator will consider whether you should continue in operation or go back to a bureau. And then, invariably, they'll offer legislative reforms, right? So whatever you come up with today could be altered by the policymakers next year.
I would suggest, therefore, to take Mr. Weeks' approach. Be strong in your mandate to protect consumers. If policymakers think you've gone too far, they're the ones that write the bills, not you. You give them recommendations, but at the end of the day, they write them and they vote upon them. And then the governor decides to sign them or veto them. So don't think that you have to compromise with yourself at this stage. Don't negotiate with yourself, in other words. And certainly don't compromise your mission of protecting consumers. And consider the unintended consequences of not connecting this to an establishment, not connecting it in an employer-employee-based relationship. The Supreme Court has essentially made it moot. All of these apps will be illegal as soon as DIR finally promulgates regulations and catches up. Because if you hold yourself out as a business that does beauty or barbering services, by the ABC's number 2 test, B, you have to be an employer. Period. It's that simple. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the employer-employee thing, except to say, if you don't require them to be employees, you are ignoring the current law as laid out by our highest court. So telling policymakers you're requiring them to be employees is no more radical than the Supreme Court telling them they have to be employees. It's not radical, it's the law. So why give up the employer-employee relationship when the law requires it anyway? It's not sufficient. I wish the lady that had started one of these apps, which are by definition currently illegal, wasn't here to talk to me about it, because yes, she was right on the A test and possibly right on the C test about not providing them the equipment as you asked, etc. Not controlling them, that's the other A test. But the B test is, if you hold yourself out as a provider of beauty or barbering services, you have to employ them. It doesn't matter if they work part-time for your company and part-time for someone else's company. Does that make sense? I'd be happy to quote the Supreme Court decision because they made it abundantly clear. They gave an example. If Kmart had a problem with their plumbing and they decided to bring a plumber in, that plumber is an independent contractor because he doesn't work for Kmart. Or she, sorry, didn't mean sexist. Right? But if you're on an app saying you want beauty services and they're called whatever, fill in the blank, but it's related to beauty. By the way, Uber, Lyft, better read up. It's coming to you too.
I was just going to ask you, are they going to get...
Indeed. In fact, the LA Times, when they reported about this bombshell Supreme Court decision, the title was about Uber, the end of their days.
So why is it that when they called EDD and Board of Equalization that they're saying, well, we're not doing it?
I work in the private sector, Jackie. I can't answer for government. They'll catch up eventually. Not a question. They can't ignore the Supreme Court. Okay. So consumer notification, you guys are going there. That's great. Insurance, I did reach out to my trusted insurance person that does beauty clients all the time. As far as dollar amount, I don't know if you need to recommend a dollar amount in statute, but if you did, there's essentially no difference in premiums on a BOP between a $250,000 level and a $1 million level. They're all about the same premium level. So don't shy away from a significant amount. And then just one other comment. When this law was passed requiring you to create PSP, it was based on one business model. That business decided it was too expensive to pursue in California. That was Manicube. Ms. Underwood mentioned that earlier. That's a cautionary tale. I was taken in by Manicube. They had an incredible pitch. For example, every instrument that touched their client was by definition disposable. One-time use. Everything. Clippers, tweezers, everything. Not just buffers. That's pretty impressive, right, Jackie? Why aren't they here now? So it's a cautionary tale. Don't base your decisions on the brighter angels of human nature and the great business models. You need to consider the darker side of human nature and where people will end up going and using what you pass as justification to go there. That's the problem, the unintended consequences. Okay, so a couple of things on your revised. G and H, the final sections, I believe those can be combined. But the one concern I have about when you reference a specific code section, are you implicitly saying they can ignore all the other health and safety code sections that you don't reference? So I think if you're going to reference 979, which I think is appropriate, I would strongly encourage you to include another line that says, and all health and safety code regulations as well. I mean, it's okay to call out a specific one, but don't imply that they can ignore all the rest if you only call out two. Yeah, so I would encourage you to be strong. I do think attaching them to an establishment is probably the only and best way to assure proper protocols and inspection of their kits. If you decide to give up on that because you're trying to compromise now, you're still going to have a sunset review next year. And they're still going to be grinding you through the sausage mill. So I would encourage you to stay strong at this point. Thank you.
Just regarding that Supreme Court decision on the Section B that he was referencing with the app-based businesses, as we've already established, it's so new, we don't know how it all will play out. But Section B has to deal with work that's being performed that's the same. The app-based businesses are basically the real estate holder. They set up all the administrative work and the appointments. So they are in fact doing something different than the independent contractors that they would be hiring, which in this case would be the beauty services. So I'm not sure realistically how that would play out, but I did want you to be clear on the little tweak there.
Well, I think that's what Fred was saying about Uber and Lyft. I mean, they could say the same thing with them, but they're eventually going to be considered employees. And I just heard today on my way over that Uber drivers are making false claim that people are getting sick in the back of their car to get the extra $250 to charge, and it's rampant throughout Uber right now. So again, it's just one of those things that things are going to happen with that. But I do think that Uber is facing some difficulties.
If I may, Madam President, just one clarifying point, because I would disagree with my good counselor friend. I told you about the plumber. Well, this is the quote from the Supreme Court decision about bakeries. The court utilizes another example, quote, when a bakery hires cake decorators to work on a regular basis on its custom designed cakes, and by the way, they said earlier, at their home as opposed to at the shop, the workers are part of the hiring entity's usual business operation, end of quote. So it doesn't matter who has the real estate, it doesn't even matter where it's being done. If they are doing something for the hiring entity and they're holding themselves as experts in that, they are by definition employees.
Laura Embleton again with Associated Skincare Professionals and Associated Hair Professionals. My normal world is massage therapy, so this is kind of like jumping off the deep end into Cosmos stuff for me. But a lot of what I see in the massage therapy world across the country are these things called establishment licenses, because everybody's afraid of human trafficking, for better or for worse. And so they're like, let's regulate all the massage therapists so that we don't have to deal with this human trafficking stuff, and we can keep track of all of them. So they've created these massage establishment licenses, and this PSP seems a lot to me to be like what in the massage world is the massage establishment license. And it seems to me that the intent of this is to keep track of people. Like, you've got people out there working as independent contractors. So this is to keep track of all of those. And if you don't have this, or if it's optional, then what's even the point of having it? Because people are going to go underground. You know, I mean, like, if you want to bring people into the light, you say everybody needs to have this, and then we can keep track of you. They're all licensed individuals. If they're practicing cosmetology or barbering or being an esthetician or hairstylist, they have to have a license, right? They are able to be disciplined because of that license. So getting this PSP is really a way to keep track of everybody who's out there practicing independently. I don't know how this Dynamex case is going to play out in all of this. So I'm speaking in a void without that, just about this. But if the intent is to keep track of them, then do make it so that it's available for people who are practicing just independently and that are not necessarily employees. A lot of times in the massage establishment, if you've got an independent contractor, they're like out there saying, you know, Hair by Laura or something like that. And so they would register their Hair by Laura thing as a PSP. And then you guys would know that I'm out there and I'm kind of an employee of my own business. I'm the owner of my own business and I've got a business name and I'm incorporated or whatever. And so, like, I think that like, just trying to look at this differently, like, I don't think that you should have to have the requirement to be a practitioner for a couple years before you get this PSP, because that's only going to drive people underground. They're going to get out there and they're going to practice if they can get away with it. And then they'll pop up in a couple years and get it. But I don't think it's going to stop people from being an independent contractor and going into people's homes. If you make that the requirement, they're just not going to report it. It's going to still happen. With regards to keeping records, a lot of times in the massage therapy world, states will require that a massage therapist keeps non-HIPAA related information for 2 to 3 years. And then if the board needs to access it, the board can say, I need to see your records for this last year, but it's not up to the board to maintain that information. And that's a way for you guys to do that if you want to do that. Say that all licensed barbers and cosmos have to keep records for 2 to 3 years or 5 years or whatever you want. And then if you guys need to access it, you can access it. So that's a way to deal with that. With regards to estheticians in that section E, on the back side of the page, most of the time, it's my understanding that estheticians are not really going to do basic facials. They're not going to come in with a bowl and all their little accoutrement to do all of that. They're mostly going to be doing waxing and lashes at home, lashes in the home. And so maybe look at adding waxing to that and having to have the education to do the waxing for that, and maybe adding lash extensions to the stuff about applying makeup and lash strips. And then there's also a concern about hair removal only by a tweezer, because a lot of people go in and do waxing in the home. And so, like, if you're trying to get on top of who's doing what where, I would make it a big overarching thing, not tied to an establishment, because if you tie it to an establishment and being an employee of the establishment, you're losing all those people that are doing independent contractors. So if your intent is to, if the intent of the law and the intent of what you guys want to do is to make sure that you can keep track of everybody who's out there doing whatever, then make it a broad catchment and make it so that people have to get this PSP license and bring them above the ground so that they can practice lawfully. So, thank you.
Wendy Cochran, California Aesthetic Alliance. The way this is being presented, and I know we talked about this last year, so welcome to the second anniversary of the PSP conversation. This would pretty much at this point, until Dynamics and the DIR step up and say that we actually do have to be employees, this pretty much kicks out 83,000 of your licensees, because we are typically, and in a group of 4,000 people on a daily basis, I get 2 different conversations about, so if I'm a 1099, what sort of commission split should I be looking for? Still, this is 2 years after 1513 is implemented. We are still not being brought in as employees, and this just kicks out our entire license category. So also basic facials. I don't know what a basic facial is anymore. There's so many different protocols out there that if you say a basic facial, is that a double cleanse, an exfoliation, a mask? and then your finishing product, you would have to give some sort of call out to what that actually entails in protocol. Your biggest complaint is, I believe still, is in waxing complaints to the board. I brought to you sugaring last year and said that that would be an option for the hair removal specialists, which is the large majority of all the people that are just blowing off all this, well, I just do it in somebody's home anyway stuff. Sugaring would be an option because it's a non-heat hair removal process. And that is something that people are going to continue to do, is they are going to do hair removal and they're going to do lash extensions. They probably are not going to bring their whole kit with all their back bar repotted product with them into a consumer's home. That's kind of a pain in the butt. And they are more likely to do any sort of waxing or hair removal or sugaring and lashing than they are, and those two things are not included on this list. And again, I want to go back to the in good standing. I hope that you will consider putting that language in there and keep that language that your license needs to be in good standing and you need to meet these higher standards and be that better esthetician, that better cosmetologist that goes out and represents us as an industry as a whole into people's homes. So in good standing would be something that I'd really like to see somehow in this language as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Gary Federico. I sort of took on a mantra from actually another school owner friend, Bob Gross, and he always stated that to run his school, he says, students come first. I've taken that over multitudes of years ago. I don't want you to forget your mantra, basically, is your consumer. Consumer protection comes first. That's your mandate. That's what you really need to follow. And with, like Mr. Jones had stated earlier, you know, with the legislator telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it, it's still the body that you represent is the consumers out there. With this PSP, there's a lot of things about it, you know, that we've heard good, I guess, and some not so good. But I think you got to figure out, you know, where you want to stand and how you want to fight this in every way, shape, or form. Well, but what I did here, and when I spoke last time, is that through the years that I think I know Christy's been around and you know, that I've been around and Fred's been around, I really feel that we're always being chased by the boogeyman. Our agency or our board is very few times proactive. I've heard it here today. You know, it's always been done. You know, this PSP is now up here, but it's been done for the last 10 years like this, or it's been like this, been like that. And that's where I'm saying sometimes I feel that we're not proactive enough. It's maybe we should have got on it many, many years ago and controlled it in every way, shape, or form. But I do know that with this in front of you, and I think this is something that if you go forward with it, I think this is where you can try to gnash out, or I should say, you should try to get more money. Money what? For protecting the consumers. Money to, if they want this PSP, we need to control it some way or try to bring in more inspectors to, you know, stay on top of our industry, or otherwise we're going to just lose our industry. We will be deregulated, and who gives a damn from that point forward. So if anything, you know, mantra is consumer protection. Number two, yes, I strongly believe in you need to call for more money. I know the budget requests are every year, but if they're shoving this down your throats, then hey, you step up and say, I need X amount of dollars to make this thing really, really, really work. Personally, the personal service, whatever it's called, I see it personally yearly, tied to insurance. You know, insurance. If the insurance gets revoked, then the license should be revoked. There's other things, but that could come down the line if you move to go forward with it. Thank you very much for your time.
Do we have any additional public comment at this time?
Thank you for this opportunity. Al Enos is my name, E-N-O-S. I am not here as a lobbyist, nor am I here as one who has a vested interest in a hair salon, nor am I here as anyone who's against the hair salon entrepreneur. I love entrepreneurs. They're the foundation of this country. I will support them always. I am here as a California citizen, born and raised in Sacramento, where I have lived, except for my time away serving my country. I was here today to address SB 999. As we all know, that did not make it out of the committee by the June 29th deadline. However, when it was active, it received a 6-1 majority yes vote by the Senate Business, Profession, and Economic Development Committee, and a 7-0 yes vote by the Senate Appropriations Committee. This bill is not currently active, but make no mistake, it is not going away and it will be back. This currently inactive bill would remove the shampooing, the coloring, the waving, the cleansing, the beautifying of the hair of the person from the practice of barbering and cosmetology. Therein lies the negative side, the loss of governing. You can also look at the positive, proactive side. In feasibility study, there is always one alternative. It should be the very first alternative in any feasibility study that's done, and that's the do nothing alternative. To do nothing at this point in time is to declare that there isn't any reason to take any action or to do anything. That reminds me of the soccer goalie who would sit in the grass in front of his goal while the approaching team would be coming at him with a soccer ball. To do nothing would be a losing argument. An action-oriented response mitigating future legislative action could be a very winning argument. If the PSP were an acceptable legislative document, would there have been SB 999 drafted? There is more than one alternative to being proactive. I've submitted one such alternative to board management on March 26th. There is at least one other alternative, and I'm sure there are many more alternatives that would meet a proactive approach. An action-oriented mitigating response to the legislature could be a winning argument. So the board tends to defend its current course of governing by looking at the safety side of the issue for the citizens of California. Please hear me, I support the safety side of this equation. But in this period of time, how about an enhanced approach of addressing service for the citizens of California? How about an approach that balances safety with service for the citizens of California? The medical profession has arrived at this balance of safety and service. My wife of 57 years is in her 8th year of Lewy body dementia. I have a licensed dental hygienist that comes every 3 months to check my wife's mouth and to clean her teeth. That licensed dental hygienist works as an independent person, not under the control of any dental office. I have a licensed podiatrist that comes every 2 months to trim her toenails and to check her feet. That licensed podiatrist works as an independent person who does not work under the control of a hospital. I have a licensed registered nurse come to draw blood whenever necessary. That licensed registered nurse works as an independent person, not under the control of any hospital. is there something that already, and let me say that this work, this license and all this that needs to be done, works in a way that it provides a service as well as their safety. I can't imagine a profession that's more concerned about safety than the medical profession. And they've already agreed to this kind of an activity. These licensed professionals, as I said, balance safety with service, something by the Board of Cosmetology and Barbering and Cosmetology, something along this line of a proactive approach, I believe, could get the positive attention of the legislature. You can fight with the legislature, or you can mitigate a fight with the legislature. A fight against the legislature is almost a guaranteed loss of governing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment at this time?
Hi, my name is Gina Frisbee, and I'm with the Office of Assemblymember Evan Lowe. On behalf of Chairman Lowe, I'd like to thank the board for considering the personal service permit and for all the hard work that you've put into the effort and adopting a PSP that does not tie the applicant to the licensed establishment or within a certain radius. As Chair of Business and Professions Committee, Mr. Lowe has paid close attention to thought deeply on these issues. The PSP will allow licensed professionals to bring services to clients and allow businesses to innovate. The board's proposed PSP is positive in many respects. It protects consumers by limiting the scope of services, requiring background checks, mandating insurance, and ensuring proper record keeping by the applicants, which currently isn't happening. Once again, I'd like to thank you, and I look forward to working with the board on the outstanding items discussed today and on the sunset next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment at this time?
Madam President, since the last gentleman spoke on SB 999, can I also take a minute to make some comments on that bill at this point also? Or would you rather I wait? Can I just sit here? Okay, I'll go back and sit down then. Yeah.
Do we have any more public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor regarding the PSP?
Laura Embleton again with Associated Skincare Professionals and Associated Hair Professionals. I just wanted to offer you guys some information about the liability insurance because as part of our membership, we offer liability insurance, and we offer $2 million per occurrence and $6 million per year or per member per year. So that's what our minimums are for the insurance side of it. So I just wanted to provide you that information.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we do have a motion on the floor. Does everyone on the board recall the motion? Okay, so now I will call for a vote. I'll start to my right.
Andrew Drapkin, yes.
Joseph Federico, no.
Jackie Crabtree, no.
Coco Lachine, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Steve Weeks, no.
Oh, the motion carries, okay. So now we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is regarding our progress report regarding the inspector salaries, classifications, and vacancies. So I'll defer to Ms. Christy Underwood.
Just a quick note on the rest of the agenda. I don't think will be as very long as the rest. So if you wanted to continue instead of break for lunch.
Yes, I mean, I'm okay with going through the agenda?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's go ahead and roll through
We're
it.
in our stride now.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so agenda item number 5.
So I have this agenda item on here because it was discussed at a committee meeting. I don't have much of an update, that's why there's no item in your packet. We are continuing to work with the Department of Consumer Affairs. The inspectors bargaining classification, there will be up for bargaining in the year, it'll start in 2019. So the department is on board to continue, but at this point, to increase pay, we are hoping that their union comes forward and provides something to the department that all the boards can support and work with. That's about the only update we have at this point.
Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is our legislative update.
We're only bringing 2 items forward for this meeting because this was kind of an unplanned meeting. So we put these on here because they were our most important bills that we were watching. 2138 is the denial of the application. This is the bill that will require us to fingerprint all of our licensees, so do background checks on all of our licensees. It has been amended. It's in the Senate, I believe, right? Was it amended in the Senate? And it did improve, in our opinion. To be honest, my biggest concern with the bill is the fingerprinting of all of our existing licensees. And I have made that position known. After what we have experienced recently with schools, I think that fingerprinting new applicants could be a benefit to our board. It's one more step that some of our applicants would have to go through. One of the things we found in some of our more egregious schools is that individuals do not even live in California who are purchasing hours and coming to take the test. So, having to do a background check could be a deterrent for that. At this time, though, we are still in discussions with Department of Consumer Affairs, and my biggest concern is how we would possibly require 500,000 people to get fingerprint checked. That being said, the board does have an opposition position, and that opposition has been submitted to all the committees that have heard this bill. That's it.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
and then SB 999, of course, has not moved out of its committee, so we are no longer concerned with that bill.
Okay.
However, you may have public comment on that.
Okay, so at this time, we'll open up for public comment. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 7, our proposed regulations.
So we are bringing this to you. This is our regulation package that we've seen many, many times, and we have, in our review, found a couple of errors on the language. So we are asking for the board to approve this updated language. The changes consist of amending the fine for sections 989, 993, and 994 to reflect that per the statutes, they only require, per the regulations, those fines would only apply to the establishment license holder and not the individual. So we've clarified that on the new chart. So we would need a motion to approve on these.
Are they again?
I'm sorry?
Which are
Nine.
they again?
989,
989?
993, 994.
I move that we adopt the updated language for our administrative fine schedule.
I'll second.
Is there any public comment? Any questions or comment?
I just have a quick question. So 989, they're saying that, yeah, I'm sorry. So 989, we're saying these only apply to establishment licensees. So if someone holds a personal service permit, they're not going to subject to use prohibited hazardous substance?
Tammy, can I see your book? No, your law book. Oh, thank you. Never mind. So section 989 reads, no establishment or school shall, blah, blah, blah. So the fine can only apply to the establishment.
So again, so if someone holds a personal service permit, can they use a hazardous substance? Or they can't get fined for it?
I think we would probably need to look at our regulations.
Okay.
That's a good point, huh?
So considering Andrew's question, should we still move forward just adopting this and just go back through how the regulation's written? Okay. So we do currently have a motion on the floor. And is there any additional questions or comments from the board or? Yes, Lisa seconded.
Lisa.
Okay, seeing none, then I'll call for a vote and I'll start to my left.
Steve Weeks, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Kokolashin, yes.
Jackie Crabtree, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Andrew Drapkin, yes.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is agenda items for our next meeting. So do we have any proposed agenda items for our next meeting?
Anything out of the ordinary that the board would want to discuss? Keep it in mind that our hands are full.
Keeping in mind we're working on sunset review.
I don't know if I have anything out of ordinary, but I'm just curious, since we did basically shut down those schools, if there's a way to find out how many of those people who graduated from those schools took the exam and their pass-fail rates, and how many of those might have been broken down by language.
So those particular schools, we have not processed applications for
Over the last 5 years?
over the last year and a half to 2 years.
Okay.
So I can certainly provide data. I am providing an update at the next meeting on the school's situation as well. And hopefully at our next meeting, the newly appointed, well, it's been a few months now, Bureau Chief for the Post-Secondary Bureau will be coming and just talking to the board as well.
I have a quick question. You gave us a handout on the scoring methods for examinations. Or did you just give that to me? Because I was asking too many questions.
A while ago?
The came with our packages on aggregate scoring.
Uh-huh.
I just have a question on that. Is it written right? Is it written right now that we allow 5 points to be carried over from the practical disinfection and sanitation portion of the exam?
No.
Okay. They were recommending that?
Right. In a past review that we did of, right.
Yeah, okay. Who was recommending it?
I believe there was a task force, I believe, that was working and the board at the time to implement that. And I believe it was approved by the board. And then those regulations never happened.
Also, is there an average score that our Hispanic test takers fail by? I mean, is it within a 5-point realm or is it within 50 points that they may fail from? Do you have any idea of what?
I don't know, but I think we could. I think we could
Maybe
pull that data.
We can revisit this maybe at the next meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, because it's not listed, we would do public comment before going into closed session. Do any other board members have any additional agenda items they would like to see for our next meeting? Okay, seeing none, then we'll open up for public comment.
Regarding Mr. Weeks' question, there was actually a meeting held in Riverside and a committee set up and they brought back that recommendation. This also, if my memory, had to do with the barber's test, that at that time There was aggregate scoring between the scoring was combined, and you could pass the written test simply by doing well on the practical. And there was some amendments done at that time, and there was a recommendation, I think, on that side to bring 5 points over from and the board did pass it. I don't know why it didn't get into regulations, but to bring 5 points over to sort of modify some of the concerns from the barber side. Is that pretty accurate, Christy? Do you remember that?
Yes, and it
I
didn't.
don't think you were the executive officer then, but
I was right around there. And it didn't get into regulation because it wasn't supported by the department.
okay. Yeah, a lot of stuff falls in that hole. Take care.
Thank you. At this time, if there's any additional public comment,
Madam President, members, thank you. Good afternoon again. David Wolf with the R Street Institute. And members, I'm very cognizant of the fact that this is my third bite at the apple in this hearing, so I'll try and be brief. First of all, as it regards the Dynamex decision, I think it's important to remember that the legislature can hold that decision or amend it or repeal it outright at any point. And I think, as Wendy mentioned in her public comment, you better hope that they do, because this does impact 80,000 stylists, as she noted, across the state, if this decision is upheld without some sort of alteration. So, I mean, before we go around championing, Dynamex as a way to keep these salons in place, I think we need to think about that. Turning my attention to SB 999, yes, it was ultimately defeated last month, as everyone here knows, but we were pleased with what we were able to accomplish. We built a broad coalition, including hairstylists and the technology industry. The bill received bipartisan support in the legislature with dozens of legislators in support, and SB 999 also had bipartisan co-authors. The media attention given to the bill was also impressive, with over a half dozen media outlets doing articles on the bill, including a television segment on Telemundo and radio interviews. Members of the board, what the media was drawing attention to here is not insignificant. The public is becoming increasingly frustrated because no one seems to know what the point of occupational licensing is anymore. Is it to protect public safety, or is the point really to serve as a barrier to entry? Members, we would argue at R Street that 1,600 hours is completely indefensible as a public policy argument. And again, that's why I was happy to see the hairstyling amendment put in place. We still think 1,300 hours is too much, but as I told Mr. Drabkin, you guys are moving in the right direction. And that's a positive. That's a good thing. We're willing to come back and work with the board in the months and years to come to get this right. We're not going away. I know it's our first time here, but we're not going away. And we're going to continue to have these discussions. And just in closing, when SB 999 was defeated in the Assembly Business and Professions Committee last month, it's easy to look at the vote and say, oh, that bill got trashed, that bill got hammered, that ends the discussion, and so on and so forth. But of all the people that made comments, of all the legislators that made comments in that Assembly Business and Professions Committee meeting last month, every single person said that licensing reform in this area was needed. Every single one. SB 999 may have been the wrong approach to tackle the issue, but every single individual said licensing reform was needed. And I think as you go into sunset review next year, as other people have said, I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Thanks for your time.
thank you.
And if I may briefly, Madam President, Fred Jones, PBFC. I think today you just passed a boatload of licensing reform initiatives, some of which you may get some blowback from our industry. So I think you're pushing the envelope. Will that be sufficient for sunset review next year? We'll find out. It's ominous in some sense. 999 definitely was a wake-up call to our industry and hopefully to you all. But I just wanted to acknowledge that today you did a lot of work. I appreciate the staff work in advance of this meeting, and I do look forward to sensible reforms that keeps your mandate front and center.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're going to now transition into closed session. So I would like to politely ask everyone, thank you, to do what they're already doing.
Thank you.
Closing goodbye. Closing goodbye. You want? It'll be closing goodbye next time. Right? Yeah. Oh, I just want to make sure. Yeah. Good seeing you all. I always enjoy seeing you. Thank you. Oh, by the way.